If I were the devil, if I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness, and I'd have a third of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree, thee. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And the old I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington. And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let those run wild. Until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who wanted until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. And what'll you bet? I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work, in patriotism, in moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, that what you see on TV is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing. Paul Harvey. Good day.
The hammer comes down and beats you over the head for the rest of your life with a big national security stick. And so that people learn to duck their head and not speak up. Because, bad idea now.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Citizens are advised to take the following steps.
Find us, armoroftruth.net.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel.
This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test.
That's right. Daniel Alexander, Eyes on the Road, bro. Welcome to the show, folks. It's Armor of Truth Live, number 177. Have you seen the news lately? Is anything happening out there at all? Yeah, this is a busy time right now. There are a lot of things happening, and we're going to talk about as many of them as we can get to today. This is going to be a jam-packed show. So get your popcorn, get comfortable. Daniel, keep your eyes on the road there, bro. And let's dive right in. You heard there Paul Harvey from 1965. There's nothing new. These are all the same problems that have always existed, just in different forms, but we deal with them exactly the same way. We stand on truth. Where do we find that truth? Pay attention. We'll tell you about that as we move through the show today. First of all, let me tell you where we're going today. I've got a little something I want to do right here at the beginning. But when we get to the meat of our show today, we're going to be talking about, the big news from last night, a leaked draft of a Supreme Court opinion that has overturned Roe v. Wade. Well, nothing's happened yet, but this would be an indicator of what's about to happen. And it was leaked. All right, there's reasons for that. We want to help you understand, as you watch this news play out, what is Roe versus Wade? Who is Roe? What was that decision? What did it do? What did it mean? What was the original decision all about? What became of Jane Roe? What is a majority opinion? You're going to be hearing these terms. So we want to make sure that you're armed so that when you hear these stories in the news over the next however long, you'll know what's going on. You'll know how to discern what's happening. Also, Christian things in the news. Boston's refusal to allow Christian flag to fly is unconstitutional. Another Supreme Court issue here regarding Christianity that swings in the favor of Christians. What in the world do we make of this, given everything that's happened over the past couple years? So that is where we're headed. Also, World Bank, food and energy shocks from the Ukraine war could last for years. We're going to talk about food security. More specifically, we're going to talk about a new controlled food system that is now in place. And they will stop at nothing to accelerate their control. We're going to show you who it is. You're not going to be surprised by who's behind it. You might be surprised at how few people there actually are behind it. Who's got control of the seeds? Who's got control of agriculture moving forward? Who's going to be allowed to grow anything? And where will it be grown? And what are the names of the companies? I've got it here in my grimy little mitts. And we'll talk about that in just a bit. Also, Elon Musk. Champion for free speech? Really? We'll take a deeper look at that. Also, Department of Homeland Security sets up disinformation governance board to fight misinformation. So there's that. And the pandemic treaty set up by the World Health Organization for its technocratic globalism, handing the World Health Organization the keys to global government, essentially. We'll look at the big points of that. And essentially today you're going to get, especially I'm thinking about some people who may be watching us today for the first time. And we want to give a nice background of what's happening in the world right now, what it is that we do here. And helpfully introduce you, while at the same time, those of you who have been with us are going to get a deep dive on this food control issue. In the age of technocracy, scientism and pop atheism, this is why we're talking to you today. We want to help you put on the armor of God, stand against the schemes of the devil. So when the world worships the flesh, my friends, faith is resistance. You're not called into rebellion. That's not what that means. That means that if you're a follower of Christ today, right now in this world, you are the resistance. The world hates Jesus. Look around you. Now, having said that, we've got some interesting things happening in the news of the past 24 hours. We'll get to that in just a moment. But first, yes, we're going to drop back into this for just a moment. Uh-oh, there's Johnny Depp. Jezebel Spirit. What in the world is he going to say about that? Well, let's just get into it. I've noticed, here's a YouTube channel where this is, who is this? This is Lovely T TV, who is making the claim here that, well, what Johnny Depp is actually experiencing is a spiritual war, and he allowed the Jezebel spirit to ruin his life. A love story from hell. Is that what happened? Let's take a look at what we've got here. Play a clip. I'll play a few clips for you today, but first of all, let's listen to Lovely T as she...
out. One thing that I did want to go more in depth with is I've been watching this case play out. As I've been watching everything, I have come to the conclusion that this case is even more spiritual than a lot of people understand. And like I always tell you guys, one, there's nothing new under the sun. A lot of people are going through spiritual warfare, especially in these times. We are living in dark times. And I believe this whole battle between Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, this is a spiritual battle even more than it is a legal battle. And by the time I get done with this video, you guys will understand where I'm coming from. Once again, like I always tell you guys, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, and against spiritual wickedness in high places. Okay? So keep that in mind as I go through this whole situation.
Ephesians 6:12 is what Lovely T has quoted for us there. Ephesians 6:12. Well, let's think about this. Is this the case? Is this how a Christian should be thinking about this? Has Johnny Depp been attacked by a Jezebel spirit? Is that what we're seeing? Is that what we need to be telling other people? Well, surely is a cautionary tale. No question about that. I will not disagree with her there. But this is not a call to spiritual warfare here in Ephesians 6:12. Not a call to spiritual warfare. It is simply the Apostle Paul declaring a fact that we do not wrestle against flesh and blood out there. We don't wrestle. Our enemies out there are not all flesh and blood. But we do wrestle against principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places. But where is that battle? First and foremost, it's in you. The first enemy you have is your own flesh. This same apostle, who Lovely T has just quoted here, this same apostle goes to great lengths in other places, but also in Romans chapter 7, to express the battle within his own flesh. He says this, I don't understand my own actions. This is the Apostle Paul speaking. For I do not what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Now, if I do what I do not want, I agree with the law, and that is good. So now it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is in my flesh. For I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. That is the war within every believer between the spirit and the flesh. The Holy Spirit and your flesh. We are naturally, in our natural condition, enemies of God. That's what the scriptures tell us. Since the fall, that is the truth. So let's be clear about one thing. You are in a spiritual battle. No question. If you ignore that fact, if you go too far in the other ditch, too dry, then you probably aren't winning that battle. But Ephesians chapter 6 verse 11 says, put on the whole armor of God so that you can stand against the schemes of the devil, the plans, the ruses, the tricks, the deceptions, the seductions of the devil. It is completely irrelevant whether the opponent we face is a principality or a power or a ruler of darkness of this age. They're all part of a spiritual army that is organized and established into ranks and is under the headship of Satan, who comes against us. So calling out spirits by name, that's pointless. We learn more about who we are and where our enemies are in the general epistle of James, the converted brother of Jesus. We learn that people of the world live independently from God, make up their own truth, devise their own religions. We see it all over the New Testament. Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 25. We see that the world suppresses the truth about God. And then by coming up with their own truth, they become futile in their thinking, in their vain speculations about creation, about the purpose of our being and our life here. And they have vain speculations about eternal life and things spiritual. These vain speculations that are so prominent in the world affect us all. We're in this world, and we are assaulted daily by its vain desires and teachings. Christians are citizens of heaven, but still, for a while, we have to live here in this fallen world. So God's view of the world is expressed well in 1 John chapter 2, where he says, "Do not love the world, nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the pride of the eyes, the boastful pride of the eyes, is not from the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away." So back to James in chapter 3. Verses 14 through 16, it says, "But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice." So what we see in the Johnny Depp trial is the world, is the flesh being fully embraced. There's no reason here to point out that, well, Johnny Depp is demonically possessed. Maybe he is. I don't know. But as Christians, how should we be thinking about this? Wisdom and knowledge are related, but wisdom is the proper use and proper application of knowledge. The wisdom spoken of here in this passage is earthly, sensual, and demonic. A wisdom that is more characteristic of the world, the flesh, and the devil than of God. It is very popular these days, as we've just heard, and we'll hear again in more clips in just a moment, to talk about demons and spirits of Jezebel and spirits of this and that. But here's the cold hard truth from Scripture, which we stand on for all relevant truth, for Christian living, for knowledge of God and salvation. You cannot escape your worst enemy, and that is you. Your own flesh. And you know it. You know your thoughts. You know your temper. You know your desires. And you know how often they veer from the course. Charlie Taylor of Dallas Theological Seminary wrote this. He said, "We seek to gratify our desires for pleasure, ambition, significance, security, and self-vindication." This is what we're seeing in this trial, this defamation suit, Depp and Heard. Sheryl Crow had a best-selling song years ago that had lyrics expressing the dilemma of the short-term gratification that causes long-term disaster. How can it be so bad if it makes me feel so good? How can it be good if it makes me feel so bad or so sad? The Apostle Paul explained the battle that goes on inside the believer concerning the leading and conviction of the Spirit as opposed to the desires of our flesh. The unbeliever doesn't have this battle. Johnny Depp, for all intents and purposes, is an unbeliever. There's no fruits there. So he doesn't have the battle between the Spirit and the flesh. He has fully embraced the flesh. In Romans 8, Galatians 5, Apostle Paul wrote that the flesh is hostile toward God. and that those controlled by the flesh cannot please God. So now the Bible tells us that we are in a spiritual war over the great cosmic question: who has the right to rule? Paul lays it out for us in Ephesians 6:12, which we just read. We think our problems and our struggles are the things right in front of us, like our relationships, our finances, or our personal failures. But really, there's a bigger struggle going on behind the scenes that involve us, as Paul wrote, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against powers, against the forces of darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. For example, when someone says, "Man, there's a lot of problems in my marriage. There's a lot of problems at work." No such thing. Your marriage doesn't have any problems. You do. You're either in Christ or you're outside of Christ, and if you have problems in your marriage or at work or in whatever part of your life, it's because you're living according to your own desires. You're following the flesh. There are two competing sources or origins of wisdom: godly wisdom and worldly wisdom. There is a heavenly wisdom and there is a man-made wisdom based on appearance, spiritual ignorance, and lack of eternal perspective. Solomon said it well in Proverbs 16. He says, there is a way which seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. On the other hand, Solomon also says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. Do not be wise in your own eyes, but fear the Lord and turn away from evil. James wrote that man's wisdom comes from reason tainted by three forces: the world, the flesh, and the devil. James gives a contrast of the operation of worldly versus godly wisdom. Worldly wisdom comes from envy, jealousy, selfish ambition, and pride, but godly wisdom comes from humility and submission. Submission. To what? To God's revealed word. Not to some ethereal force, but to God's revealed word. His law. There's also a contrast in outcomes. The long-term outcome of wisdom that is not from God is disorder and every evil thing. This is what we're seeing in this play out on YouTube or television, wherever you're watching it play out. Hopefully you're not spending too much time with it. But there are applications we can take from this. This is what the world looks like. This is what the world does. It embraces the flesh fully. They can't figure out who's right or who's wrong here because they don't have an eternal standard to stand on. They think there's a such thing as neutrality here. But the outcome of godly wisdom is peace, mercy, unity, and good fruits. So as long as there are people with their own agenda involved, there will be disorder. In James chapter 4, verses 1 through 3 lists three sources of conflict that all come under the heading of the lusts of the flesh: uncontrolled desire, unfulfilled desire, and selfish desire. That's pretty much what makes up the human heart. Uncontrolled desire, unfulfilled desire, the things we want to happen, and selfish desire. These intense desires, lust, lead to destructive behavior. A great biblical example is Absalom. David's beloved son had it all: good looks, charm, intelligence, and the love of his family, but he threw it all away because he became a slave to intense ambition for power, which eventually got him killed. You're going to serve somebody in this life. We have to serve someone. There are no free agents. If you think you're a libertarian or an anarchist and you serve no one, you are utterly deceived. Either way, you're going to serve your lusts or you're going to serve God, who righteously demands our following and the leading of His Spirit that He has given to us. Who will we listen to and serve determines the course of our lives. If we do not seek this godly wisdom and follow the leading of His Spirit, which is into His Word and through His law, then God sees us as unfaithful and hostile. James 4 through 6. James concludes this teaching with an important principle in verse 6. God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Pride is the basic sin from which all other sins originate. The original sin appealed to our pride to know what God knows. From Genesis 3 in the fall, we wanted to be like God. Eve, in her error, believed that she could be like God in his self-sufficiency and independence. And since the time, the heart of man seeks autonomy. Don't tell me what to do. The cure for that pride that we all have is given in James chapter 4, verses 7 through 10. James gives 4 commands to emphasize our needs as servants of God to submit to his authority, draw near into an abiding relationship with God, and have contrition over sin, and to humble ourselves so God will exalt us in our relationship with him. So that's a little bit about who we are. Who is the world? Who are our enemies? The first one is right there sitting with you. So let's take a couple more clips from this. Lovely T is going to give us some more insights. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because this is very common today. I don't know if T says she's a Christian or not. I don't know. But this is common among people who are not Christians today. There's a religious spirit out there. All right, let's listen to this. Here's a little bit about the history of Johnny Depp and the mother of his children. And we'll talk about this for a second.
Okay. Around 2011, all of a sudden, after 13 years together, they begin to lose steam. And the wife is kind of unsure why, because it's like, well, we've been together for so long. What is, The
wife is Vanessa Paradis. So, never married, couple kids together.
Why is everything starting to end now? But she said she started feeling a distance. Johnny also said he started feeling very distant towards her as well.
If you embark on a journey, if you're a Christian with an unbeliever, you can guarantee you're going to run into problems. But 2 unbelievers together, there was nothing. It doesn't matter what they tell you about how pure their intentions were. There was nothing there but worldly lust. It produced 2 children. The world looks at that as love, but it was lust. It can't be defined as anything else. The fact that Johnny Depp wouldn't marry her shows you. Listen to this.
And when asked, why didn't he marry her? Because, he was with her for 14 years, damn near, and they had 2 children. And this is what he stated. He says, I never found myself needing a piece of paper. Marriage is really from soul to soul, heart to heart. You don't need to say, okay, you're married.
Is that true? What worldview does Johnny Depp have? He has his own made-up worldview. I don't need a piece of paper. Well, that's true. You don't need a piece of paper. But you certainly needed that or wanted that piece of paper when the younger, I guess, prettier or whatever, the one that seduced you right in, I guess you wanted the paper then. That paper seemed to mean something to you then. You see, what happens is the secular world perverts God's institution of marriage constantly. And this is what you see. You see chaos and mayhem. People can't figure out what to do with themselves. All right, here's another clip.
But now his new wife is 28 years old. Okay? So basically, he traded in a solid woman who had his back, who bore his children, for a young new trophy. And that's where Johnny Depp got caught up. Because from everything I researched, Amber Heard is nothing but a Jezebel spirit. That she has a Jezebel spirit running all through her. Okay?
According to what? People say that. I hear Lovely T saying that Amber Heard has a Jezebel spirit running through her. And they're not just saying this, well, it's just a figure of speech. They intend for you to believe that this spirit enters someone and makes them this way. Where do you have, what is the truth? Where is your foundation for the claim? Her behavior? A person's flesh could make them behave that badly. Look, if there were no demons, if Satan didn't exist, our flesh would cause us to behave just as badly, maybe worse.
And Johnny Depp needs to understand that this battle that he's fighting is not just for money. It's not just for his reputation. He is currently fighting a spiritual war with Amber Heard.
Is Johnny Depp fighting a spiritual war? They're not fighting a spiritual war. They're both wrapped up in the flesh. They're fighting one another's desires. They want an outcome. Johnny Depp wants an outcome to justify himself, to reclaim his reputation, the one that the world gives him. Let's see, here's another clip, the 29-minute mark. Yeah, after the finger was cut off, here we go, 29.
Of which they believe prove Johnny's innocence.
Jezebel Spirit seeks to kill and destroy the institution of marriage and family. So, narcissists become enveloped by the Jezebel Spirit.
All right, we got two claims here. Jezebel Spirit seeks to break up marriage. No, that's just Satan. We don't need to give it any special name. By doing that, by giving it some kind of special name, Satan loves that. You know why Satan loves that? Because you've just taken the focus off your number one enemy, your own flesh. Now you're looking for the problem to come out from out there somewhere, which there are problems out there. But as long as you're overlooking yourself, you're doomed. Anytime there's a conflict, our first response should be, Father, show me my sin first. That's a prayer that God can answer, will answer. That prayer will pierce the doors of heaven every time. Anyway, let's see. Here's a little more about Jezebel Spirit.
And they go on to wreak havoc in their families' lives. If you are with a narcissist, you are with a satanic being. Narcissists don't exist as people anymore.
Could be. A narcissist could be someone possessed by the devil. It could be, but it doesn't have to be. And it's not necessary. Your flesh can make you narcissistic for sure.
They're dead on the inside. Their flesh.
Now that's true. The unbeliever is spiritually dead. We'll talk about that in just a minute.
They're bone, but their soul has been corrupted. They are corrupted people. They are completely filled with.
The mistake here is the idea that somehow the soul becomes corrupted. Now that's what you're born with. You're born into sin. That's original sin, that you don't become corrupted. You already are corrupted. How just put 3 children in a sandbox and give them one toy to play with and just see. You'll see human nature quickly. Or take the toy away from one of the children. You'll see quickly what human nature looks like. It's selfish. It's for self-preservation.
The evil. There's nothing good about them anymore. Jezebel Spirit is named after Queen Jezebel, but it's not a female thing. It can be. There's no gender. A Jezebel Spirit is a name for an evil.
Now, Jezebel was most certainly a female. Was a woman. So this is, well, come on. This is made up. This is just silliness, right? To name a demonic spirit, to name a behavior, a set of behaviors, after Jezebel, Ahab's wife, it's unnecessary, and it takes the focus off the first enemy.
Spirit that attacks families, that turns people into narcissists, that takes everything good out of that person and turns them into a cold, calculating beast.
We're already cold, calculating beasts. You don't need to make up some story about a Jezebel spirit. We're already cold, calculating beasts. All of us. If God withdrew his common grace from the earth right now, you would see, even the people closest to you, you would see the truth. They might kill you where you stand. This is just the truth of who we are. This is why we need a Savior. This is why we need to praise and honor the one who restrains evil in the world right now.
I'm going to talk about some of the signs that somebody has a Jezebel spirit and you'll see it sounds like I'm describing a narcissist. So these are the signs that someone has a Jezebel spirit. They lack empathy. They take joy in hurting others. They're manipulative. They gaslight, lie, confuse. Love bomb. There's lack of accountability. They can't handle criticism. They want control. They have feigned repentance. They have pride. That sounds like a narcissist.
That sounds like a sinner. That sounds like some Christians. Does it not? You don't need to give it a special name, right? Because as long as we're looking to cast that Jezebel spirit out of the person, what we've done is we've forgotten that person in his natural state is already a sinner. His flesh is his worst enemy, and as long as we overlook that, we've got big problems. All right, so she lovely T finishes it up here with a summary.
With for 14 years. And I think that's sad. I think this is definitely a cautionary tale. And people need to understand that the Jezebel spirit is alive and real. And it's not just women. There are also men out here who have Jezebel spirits as well. So don't get it twisted, okay? That spirit can enter into anybody and turn them into something that you wouldn't even believe. So both men and women need to really watch out for that.
Okay, so the reason I wanted to share this with you today is because this is very common. And it's an unfortunate error. Somehow this spirit, this Satan and his minions, they don't care what your gender is. That's true, but this is all made up. There's no foundation for any of this anywhere in Scripture. And you're using scriptural ideas and scriptural characters and stories, and you're importing your own background. You're importing your own facts. So God has been specific about those who would add to God's word or remove from it or distort it and twist it so as to lead his people astray. Don't get caught up in that. Johnny Depp's problem is not Jezebel. Johnny Depp's problem is and was lust and desire for the things of the world, specifically more flesh and more flash. We don't need a demonic spirit to cause any of this. It can, but we don't need to. We don't need to focus on that. The unbeliever has darkened eyes. It means that he cannot see his own error and thinks that what feels good and looks good must be good. Many believers get caught up in thinking this way as well. The world, the flesh, and the devil, those are our three enemies. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. Just these two verses here from Ephesians. These are some notes from Ligonier Ministry. You once walked following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh. Ephesians 2, 2 and 3. Now here, the Apostle Paul reminds readers of their condition, their true condition before knowing Jesus Christ, before coming into Christ. This draws a stark contrast between life apart from Christ and life in Christ, so as to magnify the power and grace of God in salvation. You were dead in those trespasses, walking as everyone else in the world according to the flesh with the prince of the power of the air. There is no greater transformation possible than from death to life. Life outside of Jesus is just that, spiritual death, to be spiritually dead, spiritually blind. In Ephesians 2, here Paul illustrates a bleak image of unredeemed sinners. We were dead apart from Christ, verse 1, but not dead, but not incapable of action. Spiritually dead, but not incapable of action. Some would say that, yes, people who are dead in their sins can respond to God. I say, no, you're dead spiritually. You reject everything that has to do with God. The only action you can make as an unbeliever is transgressing anything holy, is rebelling, following the course of this world. as the Scripture says. The prince of the power of the air, the passions of our flesh, those are our actions outside of Christ. And it's right here in the inspired Word of God where these three great powers that enslave us completely before we come to know Jesus are shown: the world, the flesh, and the devil, which even after God has regenerated our hearts, we still continue to battle all through our lives through the process of progressive sanctification. This is God's will for our life. Not that we would experience no struggle whatsoever, but that we would be formed by it. It's not as though God can't control what happens to us. It's not as though He's turned His back. And Jesus' high priestly prayer for His disciples, John chapter 17, He asks the Father, starting in verse 14, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Verse 15, listen to what Jesus says here. I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. They're not of the world, just as I'm not of the world. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. Where do we find all of our answers for things like this? Why don't we just follow Jesus? He asked the Father to sanctify us in the truth, and then told us where it was. It's in His Word. Now back to Ephesians 2. The course of this world in verse 2 refers to the ways of culture and society that oppose God. There are ungodly trends in the world: materialism, naturalism, desire for instant gratification, more flesh and more flash, and more and more and more of whatever we think we want. The sins committed in our lives as unbelievers and the sins we commit even as believers continue to have effects in our lives. We call this remaining sin. This is why we need the Savior and His daily cleansing. This is what we just covered in our last Who is Jesus study from John chapter 13. We need cleansing, and then we need cleansing daily. We don't need saving daily, but we need cleansing daily. The world still appeals to the remaining sin that we have in us, and it takes time for that to go away. Certainly God can remove it all in an instant if that's His will. But it's not always His will. It's His will that we be conformed through sanctification to His will. In ancient times, the term air often referred to the spiritual realm of angels and demons. Thus, the prince of the power of the air is Satan, lest we confuse that. This leader of all that opposes God stirs up trouble all over the world, and he even endeavors to infiltrate and disturb the church. The devil is fierce, but he's easy to defeat when we resist him by the Spirit, as Jesus has triumphed over him. James 4, Colossians 2. Finally, the passions of our flesh. What is that? That's what we're focused on here, the passions of our flesh. Let's not forget where our first enemy is. The desires of the body. This refers not to our physical bodies as if our corporeal form in itself is wicked. That would be Gnosticism, which many in deliverance ministry sadly seem to embrace, even if they do so without knowing. After all, God created all good things, including our bodies. This is sex and marriage. Right? The impulse for sex is not bad, according to, of course, some Christian sects over time would and of course still in the Roman Catholic system today, suppress marriage, suppress that urge even in marriage, which is to suppress something good that God has made. The Apostle Paul is speaking of our fallen nature here when he talks about the passions of our flesh or the desires of our body. Our fallen nature, which Christ has subdued already in victory at the cross. Nevertheless, our flesh is a resilient foe that remains until our bodies are glorified with God. So in our walk with Christ, we must seek daily to mortify the flesh and deny the sins that seem to be most appealing to us. And you know what they are. It's no mystery to you why you keep falling. Romans 6:12-14. The devil would love for you to think that he is the only enemy you have, because that would mean you've forgotten the worst enemy, the first enemy that you have. Why would I say something so drastic, that you're your worst enemy? Jeremiah 17, verse 5, thus says the Lord, "Cursed is the man who trusts in man and makes flesh his strength, whose heart turns away from the Lord." Verse 9, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can even understand it?" Jeremiah 18:11 says, "Yes, they did not obey or incline their ear, but everyone followed the dictates of his evil heart." Jeremiah 14:14, "They prophesy to you a false vision, divination, a worthless thing, and the deceit of their heart." Jeremiah 16:12, "Each one follows the dictates of his own evil heart, so that no one listens to me." In the Old Testament usage, the heart signifies the total inner being, and it includes reason. So those who suppress truth and unrighteousness, their reason is clouded. It's distorted. From the heart come our action and will. Our hearts often deceive us to believe that fulfilling our desires is the key to happiness. This is what we see. What we see exalted in this trial between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. We think that fulfilling our desires is the key to happiness. What we desire in the flesh is most often not what we really need. Depp is a good example of that today, right? The advice, "Be true to your heart," fails miserably. Just look at our example here today. Many have been led to rebellion, disobedience, and great sorrow by following their heart, without challenging their heart, without challenging their initial desires, and judging it by the measure of God's truth, which of course is His Word, His law. The heart is so deceptive. Our fallenness is so radical that even the individual himself may not know or understand his own heart. That's what Scripture is telling us here. And those outside you would know even less. Follow your heart is terrible advice when the heart is desperately wicked. Now, the context here in the Hebrew seems to mean desperately sick rather than wicked in the sense of the English word. But suffice to say that unregenerate human nature is in a desperate condition without divine grace. That's the moral of the story here. Unregenerate human nature is in a desperate condition without divine grace. That's what you need to think about if you're going to watch this trial. You're going to take all this in. Don't worry about what spirit got into Johnny and ruined his life. He's an unbeliever. He can't expect anything else to happen to him except more of this. Amber Heard can't expect anything else to happen to her but more of this. They're living in unbelief. Their eyes are darkened. They're living according to their own desires. And as long as they're living according to their own truth, they're going to find nothing but pain and chaos. Now that brings us around to the biggest story of the last 24 hours. The leaked draft of a Supreme Court opinion. Roe versus Wade will be overturned. Is that what's going to happen? Does this mean that abortion is going to be illegal? First of all, let's find out what we're even talking about. What is Roe versus Wade? So we're talking about, when we say Roe, this is people's names. This is Norma McCorvey. 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court recognized a woman's constitutional right to an abortion in Roe versus Wade. What we heard yesterday from the leaked document was that these Supreme Court justices have determined that no, the Constitution makes no provision for abortion whatsoever. Right? This involves another human being. It's not about an individual's rights, is it? Anyway, the landmark ruling legalized abortion nationwide, but has been under attack ever since. So this lady here on your screen, Norma McCorvey, the case was filed in her name. Now, wasn't necessarily her idea. You'll hear more about this. She went by the anonymous pseudonym Jane Roe in court documents to protect her privacy, which didn't hold. In 1969, McCorvey, who lived in Texas, was 22 years old, unmarried, and looking to terminate an unwanted pregnancy, of which many she had had. But she couldn't. In Texas, it was abortion was a crime unless a woman's life was at risk. Similar statutes were in place in nearly every other state at the time. Now, I would ask you to suggest that if you want to know more about this so that you can take on people when they bring this case up, and understand that Ms. McCorvey was prone to getting pregnant out of wedlock. It was something that she did many times. So anyway, McCorvey seeking to, as the article states here, this comes, let's see, I forgot where I got this article. This is from NBC. NBC says, McCorvey seeking to safely and legally abort her pregnancy, sued Henry Wade, the Dallas County District Attorney, in 1970. The case went on to Supreme Court. Attorney Gloria Allred and Norma McCorvey, known as Jane Roe, plaintiff from the landmark court case Roe versus Wade. During the pro-choice rally, this is the picture that you're seeing right here. So what was the Supreme Court's decision? January 22nd, 1973, the Supreme Court handed down the watershed ruling that a woman's right to make her own medical decisions, including the choice to have an abortion, is protected under the 14th Amendment, where we get persons from. What changed after Roe v. Wade? Before the ruling, there were hardly any abortion clinics. Since abortion was criminalized in most of the U.S., the Supreme Court's 7-2 decision impacted laws in 46 states. While it legalized abortion during the entirety of a pregnancy, it stipulated that states could decide whether abortions were allowed during the second and third trimester. So it was a matter of time. When does this become a person? What was the response? Reproductive rights activists hailed it as a victory. It's interesting, right? When does it become a person? A person is a legal term. It has nothing to do with the flesh and blood. It is a person is a mask, a persona. Interesting that you would use the 14th Amendment, because that is definitely more than a person. There is more to a human life than its persona. There's a spirit there, an image bearer of God. Anyway, reproductive rights activists hailed this as a victory that would result in significantly fewer women getting seriously or even fatally injured from abortions by unlicensed providers. Now, what I'm giving you here is the standard narrative from NBC, just so you know. Opponents contended it was tantamount to the murder of a fetus. These viewpoints are still passionately held. The decision has never been overturned. But in the years since, hundreds of state laws have been passed that restrict access to abortion and narrow the scope of the ruling, including the partial birth abortion ban signed by President George W. Bush in 2003, which outlaws a procedure used to perform second trimester abortions. In 2003, a motion to overturn the ruling was filed with the U.S. District Court in Dallas by an unlikely character, Miss McCorvey herself. Of course, NBC leaves out her crisis of faith that brought her around to this choice. Anyway, what became of Jane Roe? McCorvey was 5 months pregnant when she and her attorneys decided to sue. In June 1970, as the case worked its way through the legal system, her baby was born. McCorvey gave the baby girl up for adoption. The adopted family has kept the child's identity hidden. For several years after the ruling, McCorvey lived a low-profile life. Then in the 1980s, she revealed herself to be Jane Roe and became an outspoken pro-abortion advocate, even working at a Dallas women's clinic where abortions were performed. She changed her tune in 1995 when a Christian group Operation Rescue opened next to the clinic. By 1997, she had grown close with the group and became a born-again Christian, traveling around the country to speak out against abortion. My. The 2003 motion that McCorvey filed to overturn Roe v. Wade was denied by a federal district court in Dallas that year, then by a Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans in 2004, and finally by the Supreme Court in 2005. McCorvey died in an assisted living home in Texas at age 69 in February of 2017. Now, here's what you need to know about this a little bit. This was a Supreme Court opinion, a decision. It was not a law. Nothing was ever codified about it. It's not a law. The Supreme Court of the United States doesn't make laws, just the same as a judge down in your city doesn't make law. So what we had last night was the leak of a majority opinion, a first draft of a majority opinion. What is that? A majority opinion is an explanation of the reasoning behind the majority decision of a Supreme Court. So apparently what we've learned from this is that at least 5, Samuel Alito and 4 others, agreed that this needed to be overturned. And Alito had written his justification for this, and somehow it was leaked. I'll talk about that more in just a second, too. In terms of the United States Supreme Court, the majority opinion is written by a justice who is selected by either the Chief Justice or, if he or she is not in the majority, then a senior justice who voted with the majority. So the people who are in the majority on the decision, one of them is selected to write up the decision. The majority opinion is often cited as precedent, not law, but cited as precedent in arguments and decisions during other court cases. 2 additional opinions that justices of the Supreme Court might issue include a concurring opinion and a dissenting opinion. All right, so what happened last night? A document that Politico describes as an initial draft majority opinion. Now, we know what a majority opinion is. It just tells us that they had deliberated about this for months or however long, and that they had voted and come to a decision, and it was 5-4 in favor of doing away with the previous decision. Not getting rid of any laws, just getting away with the previous decision. The initial draft majority opinion was written by Justice Samuel Alito, suggests that the Supreme Court has decided to strike down Roe v. Wade, the seminal precedent that in 1973 rested the regulation of abortion, took it away from the states, and made the procedure lawful throughout the entire United States. The leaking of the document, assuming the document is genuine, all right, assuming that it's real, and from all intents and purposes, it's the real thing that was leaked. Assuming that it's genuine and that it was in fact leaked, constitutes an unprecedented breach of Supreme Court protocol. As I was researching this, I found judges and attorneys, legal experts talking about this, that this has literally never happened in the Supreme Court. None of these majority opinions, first drafts, or nothing has ever been leaked out of there. In fact, it's always been said there, if someone's talking about what happened behind the scenes, they don't know. If someone's not talking about what happened behind the scenes, that's the one who knows. It's usually been that sealed off. So this majority opinion was a 2,400-word article. It was time-stamped at 8:30 p.m. last night. Politico describes the draft opinion as a full-throated, unflinching repudiation of the 1973 decision which guaranteed federal constitutional protections, not a law, just federal constitutional protections of abortion rights, and a subsequent 1992 decision, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, that largely maintained the right. The opinion is 67 pages long, followed by a 31-page appendix. So this unauthorized public disclosure of the draft opinion is likely to make public debate over the most controversial case of the current Supreme Court term even more embittered, embattled. The Politico article does not state exactly how the outlet, they came about the document, and typically this is how, when journalism is working, typically you don't give up your sources when things are leaked. It's usually for the good of the people. Not so sure about what's going on here, but news organizations and journalists don't normally give up their sources. That's just been the way it is. This article states Politico received a copy of the draft opinion from a person familiar with the court's proceedings in a pending challenge to a Mississippi abortion law, along with other details supporting the authenticity of the document. So, most likely what's happened here is someone who works in the court, a clerk or someone else, I don't know all the titles of people who work there, but someone there who would have access to it, who is very liberal, who doesn't want to see this happen, leaked this. Someone there was so passionate about it that they were willing to risk their very career. Anyone who's working there is going to be have passed the bar. They're going to be a part of the bar, and this is going to risk that. You'll be disbarred for breach. This is a big decision for someone to make. So you got to be thinking that I love abortion more than I love my own career, my own livelihood. So that's what we're looking at here for now. Now, there's probably more that's come out here today that I don't know about yet because we've been studying and preparing for the big show we've got for you today. But that's where it was as of earlier this morning. And we've given you some definition of terms, and hopefully now as you go about listening to the debates and the anger that's certainly going to come out about this, you'll know what's going on. This draft opinion of the Supreme Court will, in actuality, do nothing. This is true. It's not a nothing burger, though. It's not going to do anything in the law. But in the greater sense of God's providence, it will expose all those states who over the past 50 years pretended to be conservative and allow everyone to see who really stands for the Constitution in the face of all the heat they're going to catch. Who is it that actually stands for God's law today in the United States? Would God allow this to happen? Where is God in all of this? Because this is extremely polarizing, right? God doesn't polarize people, does he? He doesn't turn people against one another, does he? Are you aware of what happens in the Scriptures? God can polarize a nation. He can polarize this one, and it looks like he might. That's what might be happening here. God can polarize this nation to expose truth. God could might even allow globalists to, let's be careful here, to run a false operation of a massive global medical event of some kind. It might even allow that to pass off to expose certain things in the world, like which churches are faithful. God grows his church, usually through struggle. God is sovereign, and his ways are bound to eternal truth, not to that which seems to feel right according to the hearts of men. God grows his church with oppressions. He grows his church with sufferings because truth divides. And when the truth is revealed for all to see, just like when the light comes on in the alley at night, the cockroaches will scatter. That's what you're going to see. Pay attention for that. You're going to get to see where the Republicans you may have voted for, where they really stand. Or the Democrats or whoever. You're going to get to see a lot of truth is going to be exposed through this. That's one of the results that it will have. And also there was this other peace recently, another Supreme Court story. Boston's refusal to allow a Christian flag to fly is unconstitutional. So they had disallowed someone to fly a Christian flag. However, they had allowed the communist flag to fly in the city. And so both of these stories, this is another, I'm not going to read the story here in the interest of time. You can check it out for yourself. But the Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, nobody dissented on this one, not even the most liberal people on the court. 9-0, saying that this Christian flag should be allowed to fly. If this is all up and up, this is tremendous news. Tremendous news that people are actually observing the Constitution and that it means something. Could it be a form of dialectic somehow leading us down the garden path? I don't know. I'm just look at it for what it is for now. But here's what I want to say to you about these two stories before we get into the meat of the show today. Both of these stories actually do nothing in terms of law. The law was already there. The Constitution is clear. They were just following it, upholding it. But these two stories definitely do serve to expose who is on the side of truth. So let's just pay attention and watch what happens in the next few weeks. You're going to learn heaps about who is consistent and who is a lying opportunist shill for Satan. You're going to see it clearly. It's going to be right out in the open. And you're going to find a lot of people in Big Eva. A lot of well-known Christians who are going to be, the way they've been behaving over the past 3, 5, 10 years. We're going to learn a lot. So let's just keep our eyes peeled and look at it from the perspective of eternal truth. Folks, let us remind you right now to please subscribe to our newsletter. You can find that link in the description. You can also just go to our website, and a pop-up will give you the option to subscribe to our newsletter, because that's where you'll find us when they take us away from here. It's also True Normal TV is our backup channel on YouTube. I'll show you. We'll talk more about that later in the show. But I just wanted to remind you folks, sign up for our newsletter to stay in contact with us. If you're signed up to our newsletter, then we can just keep moving whenever we experience the shutdowns. But interesting, last week, Summer pulled an article where Gmail sends up to 2/3 of conservative emails straight to spam folders. This typically has to do with politicians, but folks, we know if you're standing for Jesus Christ in this world, you're the resistance and they don't like you. They're afraid of you. So please, if you've signed up for our newsletter, if you've sent us messages of any kind, check your spam folder. Not only because Gmail is sending 2/3 of emails that have words that they want to censor to the spam folders, but we're also, our newsletter is also very new, and it takes time to build a reputation. So please check your spam folder. If you find us in there, please put us back. Mark it as not spam. Put us back in your inbox so we can remain in contact with you. All right, what about the food control? What about the food crisis? Where's it coming from? Who's in charge of it? Okay. World Bank food and energy shocks from the Ukraine war could last for years, according to the World Bank. They say the war in Ukraine has dealt a major shock to commodity markets, altering global patterns of trade, production, and consumption in ways that will keep prices at historically high levels through the end of 2024, according to the World Bank's latest Commodity Markets Outlook report. The increase in energy prices over the last 2 years has been the largest since 1973, when they had the oil crisis. Price increases for food commodities, of which Russia and Ukraine are large producers, and fertilizers, which rely on natural gas as a production input, have been the largest since 2008. So we have fertilizer mentioned here. Very important. component in food production, right, and food supply. So when we get to our big story of the day here, the control of the global food supply, we're going to find out who's in control of fertilizer, not just the growing and the agriculture, but what about the actual fertilizer? Is it being limited by anyone? World Bank has a food security update where they say Indermit Gill, the World Bank's vice president for equitable growth, said, overall, this amounts to the largest commodity shock we've experienced since the 70s. As was then the case, the shock is being aggravated by a surge in restrictions in the trade of food, fuel, and fertilizers. Food, fuel, and fertilizers. Three things that nations need to survive, and that's water, energy, and food. Food, water, and energy. Those three things, that's the big three. Those are the things that are being attacked right now. Energy prices skyrocketing. Food, shortages. What's happened to the supply? And if you've been following us here, we've not been shy about saying what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. Horrible and tragic for the people there, for sure. But this is not just an event that popped off organically. We showed you in our reports that this is something that was intended. Fertilizer prices surged in March, up nearly 20% since January 2022, and almost 3 times higher compared to a year ago. High fertilizer prices pose a serious threat to food security, as they will impact food production in the next production cycle. Because, of course, Russia and Belarus are major exporters of fertilizer. So that's all shut down for now. In April 13, 2022, the heads of the World Bank Group, International Monetary Fund, United Nations World Food Program, and World Trade Organization jointly called on the international community for urgent action to address food insecurity. They say that between 720 and 811 million people in the world went hungry in 2020, according to the UN report on the state of food security and nutrition in the world. So that's the better part of 1 billion people that they say went hungry in 2020. But why? Lockdowns. Not because of virus, because of lockdowns, because of shutdowns. Nearly 2.37 billion people, or 30% of the global population, lacked access to adequate food in 2020, a rise of 320 million in just 1 year, which will have lasting impacts on the cognitive development of young children. Everything seems to be breaking for the globalists at the moment, but then we have this story here over the past couple days. Interesting stuff. They say acute food insecurity is defined as when a person's life or livelihood is in immediate danger because of lack of food. According to the Global Network Against Food Crises, an estimated 1.61 million people experienced crisis levels of acute food insecurity in 2021. Also, additionally, 227 million people were estimated to be in the stressed acute food insecurity, one step away from crisis. The point being, hunger was trending upward even before 2020 and the pandemic, which exacerbated existing effects from extreme climate events, conflicts, and other shocks to economic opportunities. Of the 161 million people experiencing crisis conditions in 2021, 81%, or 132 million, lived in countries affected by fragility, conflict, and violence. Now, the World Bank says it's doing plenty to stop this. Now, it's weird, isn't it? Because when we follow the money on how these things happen, we always seem to find the same people in control of these things happening in the first place. And then they respond to, look how we're fixing this problem. Reaction. Solution. The World Bank, in the face of multiple crises, is deploying short and long-term responses to boost food and nutrition security, reduce risks, and strengthen food systems. In other words, what we see here is the global move to get control of all the food supply, to make sure that the World Bank and the UN and whoever else, that control of food is in the fewest hands possible, because that's how you have the greatest control. I'm not being cynical. I'm going to show you with evidence here in just a minute. That's what's happening. So let us understand one thing before we go one step further in this expose. Since at least 1992, the claim of those who seek to establish a globalist one world order under the banner of sustainable development has failed miserably. They tell us it has to happen, we've got to get it done, or things are going to get awful, we're going to have catastrophes. Well, what they've done has caused catastrophes. And we have the evidence of it. It isn't often or ever covered in the mainstream, but this movement to save the earth has created far more problems than it has solved. Where we have seen growth and useful advancements, they have come from the same places they always came from in the past, from creative and industrious men and women who were relatively uninhibited by these globalists and these environmentalist policies. In 1972, that's the year that the United Nations held its conference on the human environment in Stockholm, Sweden. Just a little history here for you to set you up before we get into this story about who's controlling your food, who's going to be controlling your food. Already does. 72. United Nations held its conference on the human environment in Stockholm, Sweden, aka the Stockholm Conference. So in a 2-week period here, representatives from 113 nations, over 400 non-governmental organizations, attended and produced the first action plan for the what we now see as the common fear-based climate narrative. The plan's 109 specific recommendations contained one of the first references to global climate change, 1992. Recommendation number 70 of the plan decreed that 1. Every human has the right to enjoy a clean and healthy environment. And number 2, every human has the responsibility to preserve the environment for future generations. Now that second point is the key point here. Responsibility to future generations has become the mantra for global governance and power grabs since 1972, without any true consensus that there exists any real existential threat to humanity other than these power-hungry elites. The Stockholm Conference was the foundation for the United Nations Earth Summit, held in June 1992 in Rio de Janeiro. That's Brazil. 172 nations, representatives from 172 nations, 108 heads of state, 2,400 representatives from non-governmental organizations, all got together to provide recommendations for the path forward into a new green world order. Earth Summit 1992 produced 2 key documents. First of all, Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, and secondly, the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development. This is where we were first introduced to the term sustainable development, which is defined as increased or intensified economic activity that meets the cultural and physical needs of the present generation of persons without damage to future generations. So you can see how this mantra of being responsible to future generations, you can see how that can be quickly and easily weaponized. What, you don't care about your grandchildren? You don't care about the people who are going to come after you? Maybe we need to just lock you up or bar you from society. Well, you don't want to get your vaccine? Maybe we should bar you from society. All of these things seem to go in the same direction. Okay, that's 92. 10 years later, Earth Summit 2002 produced the Johannesburg Declaration, which reinforced the Rio Declaration and Agenda 21. It called for an end to all conditions that threaten sustainable development. How would that look? What are the conditions that they say threaten sustainable development? Drug use, corruption, terrorism, ethnic intolerance, and natural disasters. They called for an end to natural disasters. A conveniently wide-ranging spectrum of loosely defined behaviors and natural disasters that could include anything or anyone that challenged their push for global dominance. Today, as we see, even the way we're speaking here, or some people would call it misinformation or hate speech, these are things that are considered threats to the so-called Movement for Sustainable Development, Agenda 21. All right, so the Stockholm Conference also led to the Kyoto Protocol, a treaty committing its signatory countries to impose arbitrarily prescribed limits upon their assuming citizens who were their unassuming citizens, people who were never given an opportunity to vote on any of these measures, nor were any of us ever briefed by our leaders on the long-term impact of these new policies that would eventually turn out to be far deadlier than melting ice caps. So there's your history for our food supply story. One more story before we get into that. I want to point out to you a story that came out that seems to be breaking in our favor, if it's all true. North Carolina parents running for local school boards, saying, I just couldn't sit on the sidelines anymore. Getting involved. So the message to you is this, and it has to do with globalism, Agenda 21. You're not going to fight it at the federal level. They're all working for the same thing. But where you fight it is at the local level. Here in our state, here in our locality here, yesterday was election day for local elections, local positions, officials, our local government. You need to be aware of who they are. You need to be aware of what they stand for. You need to be involved in that. If you think the federal election is a scam, that's fine. I'm not disagreeing with you. But at home, in your own backyard, you have to be involved. We can't be apathetic. Christians are not called to sit on the sidelines when it comes to these things. Parents in North Carolina have begun to look deeper into what's going on in their public schools and have found disturbing trends with the curricula. And you might be asking, what's this got to do with the climate change and the environment and food? Hang on, you'll find out it has a lot to do with it. Critical race theory, or CRT, a Marxist philosophy that claims society can only be explained by the theory of class struggle between oppressors and the oppressed, specifically labeling white people as the oppressors and all other races as the oppressed, was just the beginning of what parents found in North Carolina when they looked through curriculum. They found schools using methods of indoctrinating children while sacrificing basic learning skills such as math, science, and English. For example, parents found that large chapters of history were being omitted in favor of some others. Students taking honors level classes for both U.S. history and world history had not learned about the American Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War I, World War II. One parent reported, the entirety of my son's U.S. history curriculum was civil rights cases, which, of course, are important, but they don't make up all of U.S. history by any stretch of the imagination, unquote. The school board's position over the last few years has been to regularly deny teaching this way. The question is, how did they start teaching? Why did this happen to the local schools? This is Agenda 21. This is part of sustainable development. You might say, how has this got to do anything? Just stay tuned. But finally, many parents have now come forward to describe unorthodox, reality-distorting concepts being taught in schools. For example, the idea that a child can choose his or her own gender, or that gender is somehow assigned arbitrarily, therefore is just a social construct. And a major tenet, once again, of critical theory or critical race theory is that truth comes from the narratives we create about our experiences. That there is no objective or absolute truth, and if you claim there is, well, that's oppressive, and you're exerting your privilege over other people by claiming that truth can be known. One parent, a teacher herself, said, there are teachers literally telling their students not to tell their parents what they're teaching. She says, as a teacher, she says, I'm an advocate for teachers, but if you're teaching something that you're telling your child not to repeat to parents, then maybe you should rethink what you're doing in the classroom. All components of the indoctrination, combined with the low test scores and lack of focus on what's best for children, motivated many parents to run for local office and school board seats. Chrissy Pratt, do we have her here? Yeah, there she is. Chrissy Pratt is of Guilford County in North Carolina, said, I'm not a politician. This is getting uglier. But as a parent and educator, I just couldn't sit on the sidelines anymore. I had to do something about it. That's what we're all going to have to do. We're going to have to get off the couch. Get involved in your town, your city. It's going to take it. That's what it's going to. We don't have to sit back and watch the New World Order just mow over everything. It's us they're mowing over. We can stand up. Pratt is among 5 candidates endorsed by the Take Back Our Schools initiative in Guilford County, which began with Greensboro resident Stephanie Mitchell adopting and localizing a larger national movement to investigate harmful school policies. So, listen, freedom and today truth always blossoms from the bottom up. It rarely comes from the top down when you're talking about government. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Mitchell's organization shifted its focus to address the onslaught of restrictive pandemic policies that she said the Guilford County School Board enacted without any oversight. In some ways, she said the pandemic was a gift because this remote learning that had to take place forced more parents to witness what their children were actually being taught, including those who had previously written off other parents' concerns about CRT as an overreaction. She said that's when the light bulb went off for people, and it was no longer a conspiracy theory. This is real. Mitchell said that private for-profit companies backed by philanthropic organizations such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are providing grants to schools with the intent of controlling the curriculum and initiating data mining, social-emotional learning, and political agendas. You're going to hear that name again a lot today. By certifying school officials such as superintendents, those superintendents are then propagandized into becoming marketing representatives for social justice propaganda that is then distributed to the students through the curriculum, a process that exists without any transparency, Mitchell said. And I will tell you too, also from my own experience, I was a substitute teacher many years ago, and you can see that at the level of middle school, elementary school, the tenets, the policies of Agenda 21 Sustainable Development are coming in along with all of this other stuff. So we don't hear the parents saying much about that. They're more worried right now about the critical race theory and the transgenderism, which is good, all right? But Mitchell said, we do not co-parent with the government, and there's been no transparency on the money that's being spent. This is because of regional super governance. It comes out of the Agenda 21 policies, where a mayor or a city manager, a town planner or whatever from different cities, municipalities are drafted into this super region or this regional governance body. But who's there lecturing them on what they should do? That would be where these non-governmental organizations come in that cause all this to happen at the local level. They influence your local leaders who are in office, maybe with money. Maybe your local leaders become true believers in the movement. But that's how it's done. You're still electing these people, but they're being indoctrinated by the globalists. So, before we get into the food control issue, let's just say this about what we've talked about so far. It's really great to see parents getting up, getting out, getting involved in the local education system. It's a good start. But this needs to have been done 30 years ago. And not only at the PTA meeting, at school board conferences. We need to be educating our entire community, town, county, and region about these underlying policies, public and private systems that have been put in place and growing since at least the early 1990s, known as the Agenda for the 21st Century, Sustainable Development, Agenda 21, 2030, Green New Deal, the New World Order, recently touted at the World Government Summit in Dubai. Many names, same agenda. What is that agenda? Full spectrum dominance of the world and all life in it, from the level of the neuron up to the whole planet. They want control of it all. Yes, indeed, as the mother there said, this is real. And you might say, well, that is... But Agenda 21, that's an environmentalist movement to fight climate change. What's that got to do with the school board and CRT and promoting transgenderism in the public school? What's it got to do with food supply? What's it got to do with war in Ukraine? Everything. They all come from the same people, the same documents. Don't confuse the world movement to fight climate change or promote unity for an actual movement. Don't confuse all this for an actual movement that cares anything about the climate or your right to decide with whom you will unify. The purpose of the movement is to fundamentally recreate the whole world into a new world social utopia in their image, properly designated as a dystopia. Now, while you've been working hard and raising your children and paying your taxes and falling slowly asleep to what happens in your local government, and I understand this has happened because things have been working so well for a while, for many years. But while you've been living your life, a takeover has been underway since at least 1992, 1972, even further back. Much longer, in fact. But it's not happening on Fox News or CNN or at the White House or the Kremlin or in Kiev or at the European Union. It's happening in your backyard. It's been there the whole time. You've only just now become aware of it because you love your children, and some of you can see that something is bad wrong in our centers of public policy at the local level. Good. Now it's time to learn the rest of the story, because it's much deeper and wider than just the school systems. Full spectrum dominance they seek. They're coming for all of us, and they're planning to hit us where it hurts the most, where the most control can be achieved. Sustenance. Survival. They are taking over the food supply. Now, do you think that whoever controls the laws and the money is powerful? The one who can control what your family requires daily to survive has complete control. So it's time to pay attention and get involved everywhere if the freedom of the United States, for one, is going to last. If we're going to survive. It's life or death. They have played the long game on this one, people. And many of the fronts of this movement are already well established. We have a lot of ground to make up, and we don't have a lot of time to do it. So it's time to get our faces out of the mainstream news cycle. Get our eyes off the big circus and the shiny objects and focus on our own hometowns, our own homes, our own families, and work outward from there. Because that's where the devil and his minions have set up shop. If we want to know how to correct the view on a certain topic. Well, it needs to come from wrestling with Bible texts. And when we find multiple passages on that topic, we need to harmonize them. We cannot proceed on these issues without Scripture as our foundation and purpose. Relying on our political affiliations and the God of the philosophers has been the method for a good long while now, and we see the results. Secular conservatism or even moderate Christianity will not serve or save anything. Voting conservative in the federal elections, that's just a Band-Aid. It might buy you some time. But time is too short to be focused on the top-down approach any longer. God blesses His people when they live according to His precepts and seek always to exalt His name. That's first. What we need is a faithful wave of Bible-first followers of Christ who understand what Romans 13 actually teaches. To take responsibility for our homes, our churches, and our local governments. To start with the Bible on all issues. To ask God to show us our sin first. And how to restore our homes and our communities to faith and follow His word, which has never changed, yet always had the answer for His people. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Government operates in a sphere of authority. Family operates in a sphere of authority. The church operates in a sphere of authority. All God ordained. And neither shall infringe or invade on one or the other. So when the government infringes on the family, with what we've seen in these schools, when the government infringes on the church, with what we've seen over the past few years, then we have problems. Then we have a government that is in rebellion. We arrived at this point because as a nation we have rejected the peace that the unchanging rock of Christ provides. We have chosen to follow and worship men and institutions and flags and idols of every kind. The ruling oppression of the Dark Ages was established upon the divine right of kings. In other words, rex lex. The king is the law. And we've regressed to that mythical notion. Again, as today we seem to think that great wealth, power, status qualify a man to rule absolutely and determine the course of the world by decree, to be obeyed unconditionally. This is how men become dictators and rule every detail of life, and we've allowed it to happen. These modern dictators have not ascended to power based on their own brawn or skill in war or their own great wisdom and popularity. They have ascended to power because the people have become complacent and disengaged. First, from their God, and second, from their duty to serve. Things have been quiet and easy for a long enough time that the modern shining city on the hill has fallen into a stupor and forgotten how hard won freedom was. Forgotten that it was by God's hand that this experiment in freedom succeeded in the first place. Ben Franklin said, "It's a republic if you can keep it." And we have not kept it. To keep the republic, to honor God, would be to honor the divine right of God. Lex rex. Law is king. And all just law comes from the transcendent moral law written on the heart of every human being. The law of God is absolute. And all who serve in His positions of authority serve at the will of God and will answer to God for their actions while holding that office. That's something that you can remind anyone who holds authority in your municipality or your city or town. Remind them. They've got that piece of authority, that position of authority right now because God has allowed it. He has ordained this setup. We obey the authority of men until they command us to do that which God does not allow or prevent us from doing that which God has commanded. Then we disobey and obey God rather than men. Francis Schaeffer said, if there is no final place for civil disobedience, then the government has been made autonomous, and as such, it has been put in the place of the living God. And that point is exactly when the early Christians performed their acts of civil disobedience, even when it cost them their lives. Acts of state which contradict God's law are illegitimate acts of tyranny. Tyranny is ruling without the sanction of God. To resist tyranny is to honor God. Any Christian telling you otherwise has got it backwards. The bottom line is that at a certain point, there's not only the right, but the duty to disobey the state. South African pastor David de Bruin said, at least one thing needs to remain certain in our lives. That is our covenant with Christ and his people. We need the rock-solid pillar of the church, the pillar and ground of truth, not the shifting sands of arbitrary laws of men. And that's the answer. Now let's talk about food control. Communitarianism is the way of the future, balancing your individual rights with the rights of the community. Defined as the global community, it's the new enlightened form of political discourse. If you disagree with this stuff, they'll tell you you're selfish. It's for the good of the planet. It's for the good of your health to line up and take your medicine. And it's for the good of security for you to be locked down. It's for the good of security for you to give absolute control to corporations. Communitarianism is to protect the rights of those in the future. That's the mantra that we hear. Now, our story today, our main story that we're getting to today is the new controlled food system. Now in place, they're going to stop at nothing to accelerate their control. This is from the Solari Report. Catherine Austin Fitz, this is her website, and the article is by Corey Lynn. So whoever controls the food supply controls the people. Who controls the energy can control whole continents. Who controls money can control the world. Famous quote by Henry Kissinger, ringing true, more true by the week. If they control the seeds, they control the food. If they control the food, they can use the digital ID to control consumer access to the food. While a rash of fires has suddenly destroyed food processing plants, meat processing plants, and fertilizer plants recently during a time where farmers are hurting and supply chain issues are kicking in. Just yesterday, another food processing plant up in flames. Look, I'll show you in just a bit. There is a big list of these plants that have caught on fire. For some reason, been destroyed. Naturally, I don't know. I don't. After what we've just read, what I've just laid out to you here, I don't think there's any reason for us to trust these people that are in charge. They've done worse than this, and we can see it. So here's the article from the Solari Report. The link is obviously in the description for you. Imagine a day where farmers markets no longer exist. You can't drive over to your local farmer to buy produce or cuts of meat, and the only food growing outside of the globalist secured indoor vertical farming and lab-grown meat facilities is your windowsill garden or your own greenhouse, which may be regulated so that you can't have one. it's my opinion, it looks like as we read through this, that food supply in the future might look a little bit like healthcare looks today, where you've got regional healthcare providers. I think they're going to be regional food providers for the masses. Of course, those who have access and means can get special food. They can get real food. All right, so let's dive into this thing. How did they lock all this down? Like under the radar. How did this happen? How were they able to get this so well established without people in the world, lots of people in the world, just standing up and complaining or stopping it? The food industry is already monopolized by 10 companies. Let's give you some full screen here. This is what the food industry looks like. 10 companies are in control of all of the brands that you see in your grocery store or wherever you shop. Right? You think that some of these brands are competing against one another? No, they're not in competition, my friends. They're in cahoots. Now, we also find when we look deeper into this that it's the same. There are the same investment groups keep popping up over and over that hold majority shares in all of these companies. It is the Vanguard Group, BlackRock, among others. We'll tell you others in just a moment. Major shareholders, top shareholders in all of these. So what this means is that this is the evidence. This is just to show that all of the food supply is in the control of a few men, we'll say. Few investment funds. CF Industry Holdings, the world's largest fertilizer company. Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street. These all happen to be top shareholders of Union Pacific. Union Pacific, the railroad corporation, is mandating railroad shipping reductions by 20%, cutting off supply. Let's keep going here. We're going to talk about CRISPR in just a moment. In the year 2014, during the Obama administration, Congress established the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, the FFAR, through the Farm Bill, which ultimately created a nonprofit organization outside of the government with $200 million of taxpayers' money to boost it and get it started. Additional millions of dollars of funding and support came from Bill Gates and USDA Secretary Bill Sack announced in his creation of this on July 23, 2014, stating that they were appointing a 15-member board of directors. Remember, the government set this up, this non-governmental organization, to take control. And they'll have a 15-member board of directors, which unsurprisingly include Deputy Director Robert Horsch of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and high-ranking employees from Cargill, from the Aspen Institute. We've talked about these here recently, among others. This new foundation would leverage public and private resources to increase the scientific and technological research, innovation, and partnerships critical to boosting America's agricultural economy. Let's do a translation. Agricultural economy, America's agricultural economy, boosting it. Translation, controlling it, getting control of every last bit of it. On April 2nd, 2019, the FFAR, the Food and Agricultural Research, the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, announced that they were launching something called Precision Indoor Plants, a consortium, a public-private partnership consisting of indoor growers, breeders, and genetics companies, including these names I'm about to mention. We're going to look at in detail coming up in this report. Aero Farms, BASF, Benson Hill Biosystems, the Fluence Bioengineering, Green Venus, Japan Plant Factory, and Priva. Their focus is on 5 key crops: lettuce, tomatoes, strawberries, cilantro, and blueberries, with a goal to advance speed breeding and to alter chemicals produced in plants that impact flavor, nutrition, and medicines. Well, that doesn't sound so bad, does it? Bill Gates insists that droughts and climate change is destroying our ability to farm, and that the future will consist of populations moving into metropolitan cities where indoor vertical farming is necessary to feed people. Pay attention to this term, vertical farming. Indoor vertical farming, right? Because the climate is changing. We have to do this. We have to build these indoor vertical farming facilities. If this is the case, why has Bill Gates acquired 250,000 acres of farmland over the past decade, while at the same time investing in indoor vertical farming? I mean, who's going to get to eat the good food? Who's going to get to sit at the table with healthy produce served up by the farmland that Bill Gates owns, while the rest of the population eats gene-edited produce from locked-down facilities, delivered to their local grocery store and accessed only through your digital ID? That's what it looks like. This is intended to be. Well, that's what it is intended to be. Whether they'll get all the way there or not, I don't know. Meanwhile, the consultative group of International Agricultural Research, this is CGIAR, holds the world's largest private seed banks consisting of 10%, now that's huge, 10% of the worldwide germplasm across the globe, which is controlled by the, say it with me, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Also, Rockefeller and Ford Foundations and the World Bank manage 750,000 accessions of hijacked farmer seeds. So seeds must be controlled. And that's what we see here. You won't be able to you won't have access to any other seeds other than the approved ones. August of 2020, Monsanto, Bayer, and Singapore's sovereign fund, Temasek, launched a $30 million startup called Unfold, which develops new vegetable seed varieties tailored to vertical farms. Bayer licensed the rights to these seed germplasm from their vegetable portfolio, and by 2021, last year, they leased a 12,000 square foot laboratory research building in Davis, California. But don't worry. Rather than genetically modifying and inserting a gene into the DNA strand, like how Monsanto operated, they only intend to cut out a gene, still modifying its DNA. Perhaps, now let's just be objective. Let's be fair for a second. Maybe this can be done in an effective and beneficial way. Maybe it can. I don't know. But at the hands of these people we've just mentioned, at the hands of those people we just described here, those behind Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, 2030, all of the United Nations agendas, those are the ones in charge of it. And that's reason for us to be suspicious. GMOs already account for about 80% of the food Americans consume. There are already over 100 companies in the Sacramento area working on seed development for the United Nations. So it should come as no surprise that the University of California is developing a plant-based mRNA vaccine that in the hopes that farms can grow edible vaccine lettuce. That's right. National Science Foundation granted $500,000 for this study. Imagine walking into your local grocery store on a frigid January day to pick up freshly harvested lettuce, fragrant basil, juicy sweet strawberries, and ripe tomatoes, all of which were harvested at a local farm only hours before you'd arrived. That quote from the USDA's article on vertical farming for the future, published in October 2021. Sounds enticing and convenient, doesn't it? Especially in anticipation of meeting the needs of 9 billion people by 2050, doesn't it? In October of 2021, USDA's article on vertical farming for the future is where that quote came from. But there's always a but to that. What's going to happen to the farmers when these astronomically enormous indoor vertical farm facilities have taken over every major city? When they've locked in contracts with all major grocery store chains and are funded by some of the same billionaire globalists who are seeking to control human beings, full spectrum dominance, right? This is our point, through every industry for this fourth industrial revolution. So it's a legitimate concern that we raise here. You can add to this gene editing, the word smart, traceable, net zero, all of this to the production of these facilities, and the fact that they are still moving full speed ahead on digital IDs and currency, and it becomes even more concerning. Full spectrum dominance. Wouldn't it make more sense for communities to be doing this to meet their own needs? Wouldn't it make more sense for parents to get involved and go down and become leaders on the school board? Wouldn't it make more sense for us in our own communities to start to get together with landowners in our own areas and start talking about how we could feed our own communities? Yeah, we've been fat and happy for way too long. We're in trouble. It's time to smell the coffee. Wouldn't it make more sense if we did this ourselves? If we worked in our own neighborhoods and communities rather than relying on digital IDs to get access to the controlled food industry? There are ways to grow food and feed yourself, to grow good food and feed yourself. And still, at least for now, we're able to get together with people in our communities, especially if you live in a rural area, and farm the land. That's how it's always been done. People should also be aware of what's been taking place with cattle ranchers and the globalist plan to take over the meat industry as well. Lab-grown meat has already been approved by the FDA and USDA to move forward in the U.S., and labs are eagerly filling up their petri dishes to get this ball rolling. In fact, back in September of 2021, the USDA was seeking comments on the labeling of meat and poultry products derived from animal cells. This all happened in a press release that no one knew about. Upside Foods' lab-grown meat facility just launched in California, funded by Bill Gates, Temasek Holdings. You're going to hear the same names throughout this. Just a few companies, corporations, men are in control of this. And 37 other investors. Meanwhile, the USDA is still pushing for RFID surveillance of cattle and doing everything they can to control ranchers. See, they don't want us to get together with local landowners and farmers and take care of ourselves, because that would be liberty. USDA and the FDA are fully on board with genetic modifications. First it was pigs, then it was salmon, then it's cattle. Who knows what concoction will move from the petri dish onto your dinner plate when it's the same individuals behind every single one of these agendas. In February of 2016, the Good Food Institute was launched by Bruce Friedrich with funding from, say it with me, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Also, the Open Philanthropy Project and Y Combinator, with the goal to reimagine meat production. In October 2021, the Good Food Institute celebrated the USDA's $10 million grant for the creation of the first ever National Institute for Cellular Agriculture at Tufts University so they can back research in manufactured meat. To be certain, all of these goals are locked into place in the United Nations 2030 agenda. I'll just correct them there. Look, let's not call it something that it's not. It is the agenda for the 21st century. It's not just for 2030. It's the agenda. It's a 100-year plan. Started in 1972. Really in earnest in 1992 at the Rio Summit. It's a 100-year plan. Forget about 2030. This is the long game. So when I see folks calling it the 2030 agenda, that's true. That's what it is. But we gotta call it what it is. It's the 100-year plan known as the agenda for the 21st century. So these goals, what we're seeing here, are disrupting the fertilizer industry, disrupting the food supply chain, and a rash of course, coincidental fires that we've seen recently to food processing plants. Boy, that sure does seem to help the operation there, doesn't it? I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but wow, what a coincidence. Since the start of 2022, over a dozen major food processing, and we just had another one yesterday, major food processing and fertilizer plants have gone up in flames, exploded, or been struck by airplanes. This happened in Arizona, Arkansas, California, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Louisiana, Maine, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Oregon, Texas, Washington, and Wisconsin. Nothing odd about this at all, right? Some of the food processing plants that you see affected here that have blown up, been burned down, or crashed into by airplanes: Azure Standard Foods, Bonanza Meat Company, Cargill Nutritive Feed Mill, Deli Star, East Conway Beef and Pork, General Mills, Idaho's Gem State Processing Facility, JBS, Louis Dreyfus Company, largest soybean processor and biodiesel plant in the country, Made Right Steak Company, Maricopa Food Pantry, McCrum Potato Facility, Nestle, Nutrien AG Solutions Fertilizer Plant, Nutrien Ag Solutions Fertilizer Plant, Raw Farm, largest raw milk producer in the country, Rio Fresh, Shearers Foods, Smithfield Foods, Taylor Farms, on and on, Tyson, Wisconsin River Meats. So, to name a few. In February, the Weaver Fertilizer Plant in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, not far from here, caught fire, burning several hundred tons of ammonium nitrate during a time when farmers were already concerned about getting enough fertilizer due to supply chain disruptions and inflation. So, in an effort to make matters worse, without any advance notice, on April 6, 2022, Union Pacific, the railroad company, began mandating railroad shipping reductions by 20%. Folks, why is this interesting? Let's just keep reminding you. It's the same group. The food supply is owned by 10 food companies. And here we see the same top investors involved in all of them. Union Pacific is the same. Why would they cut their production by 20%? Because there's a bigger agenda at play. Full spectrum dominance. And so this decision to reduce shipping of railroad shipping by 20% impacted CF Industries, that's fertilizer. CF Industries Holdings, the world's largest fertilizer company. Once again, Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street happen to be the top shareholders of Union Pacific. And BlackRock and Vanguard are in the top 3 shareholders of CF Industries as well. Look, it's the same group of people doing it all. This will directly impact key agricultural areas in Iowa, Illinois, Kansas, Nebraska, Texas, and California. It will ultimately affect food supply and pricing. CF Industries is only one of 30 companies dealing with these restrictions. Now, the Canadian National Railway, CN, when it runs through New Orleans up through Illinois, branching out through Michigan and Minnesota up into Canada. Let's see. But it alleges to be helping the fertilizer market grow. So are any of these affected companies utilizing CN, the Canadian National Railway? Coincidentally, say it with me, Bill Gates owns the largest ownership stake in CN, Canadian National Railway. Surely Bill Gates and his friends will save the day through their breakthrough energy ventures, whereby they have heavily invested in alternative fertilizers, right? How about that? Limiting Gates himself playing a huge role in limiting access to fertilizers while also heavily invested in alternative fertilizers. This is the guy who in 2019 told everybody, hey, it's a good idea to invest in vaccine technologies right now because he knows what's about to happen. He's not a prophet. The Breakthrough Energy Coalition launched in 2015 and originally listed the full group of 28 involved, which has since been scraped down to Bill Gates and the occasional mention of Jeff Bezos. It's important to understand just how large this group is and how involved they've become in the energy sector. Corey Diggs, the author here, covered this group in a 2019 report involving dozens of islands they were infiltrating to run alternative energy and take over their tourism. The University of California is part of this group, as well as Jeff Bezos, George Soros, Richard Branson, Jack Ma, Mark Zuckerberg, Mark Benioff, Reid Hoffman, Tom Steyer, Meg Whitman, and Nat Simons. Bill Gates explained his love for fertilizer in 2018 while in Tanzania. Coincidentally, the Gates-led and Rockefeller-funded Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, called AGRA, has been an epic fail. Now, this is my opinion. I think that these guys are so greedy, they're going to run into problems. I don't think they're going to get all they want. We'll save that for later. But this AGRA function in Africa has been a huge fail. When their first ever evaluation report came out in February of this year, 2022, after a 15-year effort, when they made bold claims to rescue Africa's small farmers, their false promise to double yields and double incomes of the farmers for 30 million farming households by 2020 was removed from their website in June of 2020, after an assessment by Tufts University revealed little evidence of progress and in fact showed a 31% increase in hunger. Once again, we'll just offer you the evidence and you can decide for yourself. Are they fighting the good fight? Evaluators stated there were many deficiencies, and AGRA's reporting and monitoring data was weak. Even the German government is considering pulling funding from this Gates-led organization over their pesticide use, which is ironic because Gates claims we need to remove pesticides in the U.S. and move to indoor vertical farming. Yes, yes, of course. U.S. aid will, of course, continue their support of the AGRA function, having already contributed $90 million taxpayer dollars, your money, thus far. Laws were created to protect intellectual property rights for certified seeds. This was one of AGRA's biggest achievements, the things that they were able to get done. There's their participation in 72 agricultural policy reforms in 11 African countries pertaining to seed, fertilizer, and market access. In Africa, laws were created to protect intellectual property rights for certified seeds. Seeds are now intellectual property rights. And penalties were created for anyone who used open source seeds. seeds that weren't approved, seeds that you'd like take off the plant or out of the ground and reuse it. Imagine being a farmer. Imagine being a homesteader or just a gardener and having to share and trade seeds on the black market so you don't get penalized. Anyone who believes they won't try this in the United States, you're kidding yourself. Especially since the globalists hold the largest private seeds banks and invest in the largest commercial seed companies. BASF, Corteva, formerly DuPont, Syngenta, and Monsanto, now Bayer, they control roughly 50% of the global seed market. To control the food supply, you have to control the seeds. March 17, 2020, a notice was published to the U.S. Federal Register seeking comments by May 16th, 2022. I think they meant 21. Anyway, for the next year, on competition and intellectual property system, seeds and other agricultural inputs. Remember to, you have to read these things through the proper lens when you review the documents and notice that that derived from an executive order signed by Joe Biden in July of 2021 on promoting competition in the American economy. Their ultimate goal: every human being, every piece of food, every resource and product on this planet will be tracked and traced via blockchain. This is not a theory. This is the goal. In July 2021, the FDA released their new era of smarter food safety document, which consists of using tech-enabled traceability for a digital traceable food system from farm to plate using blockchain. A digital identity to grant access to establishments, control financial spending, and trace everyone's moves has been rolling out on multiple fronts, including the Vaccine ID passport. Eventually, they will try to move toward a chip, possibly, as it'll be easier with biometrics being installed everywhere. I might not agree with that. I don't think they're interested in an implantable chip. It seems pretty evident that they're trying to create some new technology. You don't need a chip. You just need the people to show up and get their vaccines, and then as a result of that, they will be traceable for whatever's in it. That's about all we can say about that here. Okay, there's a link that I'm going to drop in the live chat right now, which is it's a video called Urban Globalist Controlled Indoor Vertical Farming is the Future of Food. All right. I'll drop it in the chat right now. You guys can copy it and share it, but what it is... Wow, that's slow. Okay, there it goes. It's a 2018 video on feeding the world, from Mendel to CRISPR, presented by Carolyn Rasmussen. For clarification, gene editing varies from genetic modification. Whereas editing removes a splice, modification inserts a splice. But ultimately, both alter overall DNA, and both have been a hot, controversial topic among scientists and individuals. Kicking off this presentation, which I just shared with you there in the chat, Rasmussen makes a good argument stating that humans have been crossbreeding dogs for decades and have been selecting traits in crops, have grafted them and crossbred them for hundreds of years, leaving everyone to feel like a simple slice removed from the genetics of a carrot or wheat is no different. And in fact, it's needed. It's necessary to make them more drought tolerant or disease resistant. They have to be drought tolerant because climate change, right? It's changing the climate. We have to do this because of that. There's no other reason we want to change the DNA. It's because of that, right? While also helping them to grow faster, making them more flavorful. We just want to make your food taste better. That's what they're telling us. And allegedly more nutritious, right? They're interested in us getting better nutrition. Now, you believe that, right? They want us to be more healthy because a more healthy populace who can think clearly is easier to control, right? No, it's not. Of course, they don't want to make us healthy. Whereas most people might say that it's not right to alter nature, but when faced with starvation, they may change their tune. That's what the position they want to put us in, facing starvation, so that you'll have to follow along. The real question one needs to ask is, are we faced with starvation, lack of land, drought, unusable soil and farmland, and all of the other scary stories that the globalists keep insisting people should fear right now? Is it real? Are these catastrophes that they're fear-mongering with, is it real? Anything could happen. God's in control here. But what do they know? How do they know? Would they lie? Well, we've caught them in it many times. If that were the case, would Bill Gates have purchased 250,000 acres of farmland in the worst investment of the century? Right? Unlikely, folks. Unlikely. It is a faster, less labor-intensive, pesticide-free, more convenient, environmentally friendly, and sustainable way to grow produce through indoor vertical farming. Is that the answer? It's tough to argue. It's actually quite brilliant when you think about it. If not for the investors behind it and unregulated gene editing taking place, creating one's own vertical farm on their property might be the best option in this case. So there's nothing wrong with the technology of vertical farming. Once again, folks, it's the people who are pushing these massive regional indoor vertical farms and controlling all the seeds. The World Economic Forum assures us that urban indoor farming is the way of the future for our food, both in the countless articles as well as videos featuring App Harvest and Arrow Farms, which we'll look at in detail in just a moment. But for now, let's take a look at this piece from Venture City, a high-tech city farming. This is about the biggest vertical farms, investors, grocers, and locations, while the future of farming is in cities. The big money in vertical farming.
Across the world, the future of farming is being brought into cities. You have Kimball Musk, brother of Elon Musk and co-founder of Square Roots, that has a shipping container farm in Brooklyn. And under the streets of London, there is a shelter that is being converted into an underground farm. There are tiny farms under Michelin star restaurants in New York City, and a Tokyo office building which has its own rice paddy field in the lobby. This is a look at why there is big money being invested into bringing the future of farming into cities. With sunlit open fields and fresh air, why would you want to bring farms into cities? It is being done to create a more sustainable future. Right now, there are 7.7 billion people on the planet. By the year 2050, this number is set to rise to 9 billion. And at the same time, climate change could lower crop production by 25%. Other big reasons for farming being moved into cities include there is just not enough fertile farmland that can be used to feed everyone. This is why you see rainforests and jungles being cleared, and fertile land is also being lost to climate change. Another reason is that it is much more efficient to grow leafy vegetables in vertical farms. You can grow a lot more with less space and less resources than a traditional farm. The UN estimates that 20 to 40% of crops that are grown are destroyed by pests. So growing in a closed environment without soil means no pests and no pesticides are needed. This also means that you get healthier and more nutritious food, and you don't lose nutritious value when the food is being transported, since you can now get your vegetables from farm to table in hours.
All right, as we said before, this would be great. This is a great innovation. We should do this in our communities. The problem is those same people have bought it up and control it. And they seem to be dead set on making sure that you can't grow your own food. This will be the food supply. That's the evidence. We'll drop that link to that video. It's about 12 minutes long. We don't have time to watch it all here today, but I'll drop it in the chat right now. You guys can check it out. Most of these links will be available for you in the description. So there it is. Future of food, the vertical farming. So why the future of farming is in cities? When people are rushing through the grocery store to pick up food for their families, make a beeline for the produce section to grab bags of lettuce, fresh veggies, and fruit, most people don't pay any attention to the brand itself. They just look at the expiration date, which is something you better pay attention to here recently. You paying attention to the expiration dates of the food you're buying in the grocery store today? Yeah, you better be paying attention to that, because a lot of the stuff that's being delivered is already expired. Something's up with the supply. And it's not happening naturally, organically. It's being squeezed. The lockdowns in China, whatever else is happening, we know that this is the goal, and part of that, achieving this goal, is putting a stricture on the food supply, and we can already see it. Good chunk of grocery chains across the country are already serving up vertically grown food without people realizing what they're buying. And it wouldn't matter, unless for the fact, of course, that these same people, these same 10 companies, these same investors, this same Bill Gates and these same Jeff Bezos and Zuckerberg and all these people who have made it clear they want to rule the world. And what you eat and what you think are the ones in charge of it. Have they begun rolling out vaccines into lettuce at grocery stores? How would you know? How would you know if they had or hadn't? How would anyone know? What products have been gene edited? How would you know? This is not fear-mongering. It's to the point, it's just to point out the rapidly changing industry which the masses know painfully little about, so that people can start asking questions, do a little research, and perhaps begin growing your own food, or at least be educated on what's out there, what's happening, so you can make educated decisions, so we can start operating and taking this back from the local level. That's how it's done. Voting Donald Trump back into office is not going to change it. Vertical farming substitutes soil with aeroponics, hydroponics, or aquaponics. They all claim they can produce between 300 to 400 times more product than traditional farming. In a 2018 report by Globalist on indoor farming, they reported that glass or poly greenhouses were the most dominant at 47%, followed by vertical farming at 30%. And those numbers have likely flipped by now. So here you can see the facilities by region. We're going to show you, we're going to name them, we're going to call them out by name here shortly. So you can see indoor vertical farms are listed there in purple. Glass or poly, normal greenhouses, the typical traditional greenhouses that we're familiar with, are there in green. But the point here is the purple. Those are the indoor vertical farms. That's where they're most prevalent at the moment. So let's talk about some of these companies, and who. Not only this is where it gets real, because we're going to talk about the companies who are these massive vertical farms that are going to feed people for a 200-mile radius. Who's investing in them? Who owns them? Is it the people? Is it the local people? Are they co-ops? Of course not. Founded in 2004 by David Rosenberg, Ed Harwood, and Mark Oshima, Arrow Farms is a private company based in Newark, New Jersey, and has thrived for much longer than the other vertical farms in this report, having grown over 550 crops. Some of their main products include baby kale, watercress, and rocket, which are sold under the name Dream Greens, and they are now growing berries as well. In 2017, Arrow Farms received a $2 million grant from the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research. Do we remember what that was? The FFAR? Let's remind you, in 2014, the Obama administration, that Congress established the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, the FFAR, which ultimately created a nonprofit organization outside the government with $200 million taxpayer dollars and funded with additional millions from, say it with me, Bill Gates. And they eventually created a 15-member board to get it out of the hands of the public altogether. So, right, so as of 2021, Arrow Farms already had 9 farms and was working on building a 10th. They state they can go from seed to harvest in 15 days with their patented technology. In 2021, Cargill announced its partnership with Arrow Farms in a multi-year research collaboration on extending cocoa bean yields by experimenting with indoor growing technologies. February 2021, CEO of Arrow Farms released a short video describing how they utilized one of their 10 farms to scale up proteins for the COVID jab and boosters. They also indicated in a presentation that they had participated in growing an active pharmaceutical ingredient for the C19 therapeutic trial sponsored by the National Institutes of Health. The study on proteins from plant growth at Arrow Farms and Fraunhofer is listed here in the article. This article that I'm sharing with you is listed in the description. It's full of links. You can do plenty of research with this. In a March 2021 SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission document pertaining to a potential merger between Arrow Farms and Spring Valley Acquisition Corp., which later fell through, the CFO of Arrow Farms highlighted their experience with advanced genetics, noting that, to be clear, we are a technology platform, not a conventional greenhouse grower. Let me say that again. Arrow Farms, the people who are going to make the food, to be clear, we are a technology platform, not a conventional greenhouse grower using off-the-shelf equipment. We have had over 250 invention disclosures today, a number which is constantly growing. We've grown over 550 different varieties of plants to date. We also see an addressable market in advanced genetics using our platform for seed breeding and other genetic development work in plants. Here we are a founding member of the Precision Indoor Plants Consortium, the PIP we mentioned earlier, and principal investigator for its first and largest project in lettuce. With this partnership, we work alongside companies like Bassett, same names, over and over. Another example has to do with CRISPR-Cas9. If you're not familiar, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2020 went to the developers of CRISPR-Cas9, which is a genetic editing tool where scientists are able to pull out a genetic trait in a genetic sequence using our platform. We co-developed in the first CRISPR-Cas9 product. Now we have to learn about CRISPR-Cas9. What is it? CRISPR-Cas9 is a genome editing tool that is creating a buzz in the science world for sure. And once again, folks, not that the technology is evil. It's what's being done with it and the ones who are in charge of it. It's faster and cheaper and more accurate than previous techniques of editing DNA and has a wide range of potential applications. It is a unique technology that enables geneticists and medical researchers to edit parts of the genome by removing, adding, or altering sections of a DNA sequence. It is the simplest, most versatile, precise method of genetic manipulation. How does it work? It consists of 2 key molecules that introduce a change or a mutation to the DNA. These are an enzyme called Cas9. This acts as a pair of molecular scissors that can cut the two strands of DNA at a specific location in the genome so that bits of DNA can then be added or removed. A piece of RNA called an RNA, GNR, a guide RNA, gRNA. This consists of a small piece of pre-designated RNA sequence, about 20 bases long, located within the longer scaffold. The scaffold part binds to the DNA, and the pre-designed sequence guides Cas9 to the right part of the genome. This makes sure that the Cas9 enzyme cuts at the right point in the genome. Let's not get too bogged down in this. We understand that this is a genetic alteration by cutting removing, adding, or altering sections of a DNA sequence. All right, in February of 2022, AeroFarms partnered with Silal Abu Dhabi's leading fresh produce and agri-tech company for a long-term research and development of transferring technology and data analytics of high-tech farming systems. The goal is to improve the genetics and seeding quality of vegetables and fruit. They may also work with international consortia on developing new genotypes of crops. AeroFarms serves grocery stores, distributors, and online grocers, some of which include a huge list that are likely in your town, city, or region. So that is AeroFarms. Now, we don't have a video for AeroFarms, but we do for 80 Acre Farms, which is coming up next here. 80 Acre Farms, naming names. 80 Acre Farms was founded in 2015 by Mike Zelkind and Tisha Livingston, and is a private company headquartered in Hamilton, Ohio. They provide fruits and vegetables to over 600 retail and food service locations, already well established. Their robot-powered indoor farms are said to produce 300 times more food than a conventional farm, while using 100% renewable energy and consuming 97% less water. That all sounds great, doesn't it? That's good news. We can really be efficient in how we produce food, except for the fact that these same crazy people are invested in it and are in control of it and are going to make it so you can't grow food. This is the only food that's grown, and we've just laid out here how they're also creating produce that carries other elements with it, perhaps even something like a vaccine technology that you don't know about. They're robot-powered indoor farms, of course. Their farms are powered by Infinite Farms, a company out of the Netherlands that provides complete design build services for turnkey automated indoor farms. Aside from 80 Acres Farms, Infinite Acres partners are Netherlands-based Priva Holding, BV, and UK-based Ocado. I'm saying all these names because I want you to be aware, if you want to do your own work on this, you'll find that these companies are all connected together. This is not some grassroots uprising from the people to produce food for themselves. This is top down all the way. 80 Acres Farm.
Imagine a farm where there's no need for soil, that uses 97% less water, that has no need for pesticides or GMOs, that grows produce 3 times faster with yields 100 times larger on a smaller footprint. Imagine a farm that feeds the plants the ideal amount of light energy with the precise amount of carbon dioxide, nutrients, and airflow, that adjusts temperature and humidity to fit each plant's needs. Imagine a farm that nearly eliminates all food miles from grower to grocer the same day. At 80 Acres Farms, you don't have to imagine this. It already exists. Our team of experts utilize state-of-the-art technology to master the science of farming. Our indoor vertical farms grow the widest variety and the best qualities in greens, herbs, fruits, and heirloom vegetables. Our fully automated modular units use smart vision systems that monitors 24/7 to ensure the happiest and healthiest plants. Our growers focus on plant health and nutrition, while our robots do the heavy lifting safely and cleanly. Our produce is packaged on site within a day of harvest and delivered delicious and fresh to your dinner plate. With 5 locations in operation, our vision is to expand within the nation, then the world, to eliminate all fresh produce scarcity. Our custom-built grow zones can be placed anywhere to produce an abundance of fresh produce all year long, regardless of climate.
Once again, there's nothing wrong with that idea, is there? That would be a good thing. Except for the fact that it's the same. It's the usual suspects. Funding it, controlling it. The same people who want to control your life, who want full spectrum dominance of the world, are funding and controlling this. Same people that want to make sure that that they have access and control of what goes in your body once, twice, 3, 5 times a year, are also involved with this and creating produce technologies that will carry vaccines as well, for example. So, forget about consent. It'll just be, it might not even be known what's in there. They're just gonna, it's long been understood through U.S. code. I wish I'd prepared for this, but this show would be 8 hours long if I had prepared for this. But you can see through U.S. code where citizens of the United States have been designated in the same category as cattle so that certain experiments on the population can be done. I hate to say that without just being back up with We've talked about this before, way back early on in the channel. This is Clint Richardson's work. If you want to look him up, this is his area. I can explain this very plainly for you. He is now on Odyssey, speaking freely on Odyssey. You can find a lot of his work as well. He's one of the godfathers in the truth movement, back before it became some strange anomaly or version of itself, before it became a parody of itself. But you can check out his show called Corporation Nation from years ago. We were talking about all of this, and his website, realityblogger.com. That's with 1G. Check out Clint Richardson's work on this because it's very, very useful to understand how it all works. CRISPR as well. This is his area. App Harvest was founded in 2017 by Jonathan Webb. App Harvest is a public company headquartered in Moorhead, Kentucky. They have one of the biggest greenhouses. See, the United States is leading in this vertical indoor farming movement. So they have the biggest greenhouses at 2.76 million square feet on 60 acres, where they solely grow tomatoes. In September 2020, they acquired Novus Capital, and in April 2021 acquired Robot AI. They also invested in Red Sea Farms in August 2021. App Harvest tomatoes can be found at Kroger, Meijer, and at Walmart. They've raised over $566 million in funds from 9 investors. And of course, the top shareholders in App Harvest, as with 80 Acres as well, are, once again, BlackRock Fund, the Vanguard Group, BNP Paribas Asset Management, Inclusive Capital Partners. What about Bowery Farming, another vertical indoor farm? Let me just say thank you while we're at a transition here. Thank you to Brian, who donated over on the website, armoroftruth.net. Please drop in at armoroftruth.net. Click donate, and you can find many ways to support us there. Brian Tisdale, thank you for donating to us over on the website. And, of course, Pollyanna, right here in the live chat, donated, gave us a super chat. Thank you very much for that. All of this, however you want to help us out, we're going to tell you how you have to do it. We just appreciate that you do it, because we exist because you're here helping us to be here. Okay. Bowery Farming. Let's look at Bowery Farming, another indoor vertical farming company. Let's check them out. This is founded in 2015 by Brian Brian Falter, David Golden, Irving Fain. Bowery is a private company based in New York, New York, to provide a little bit of perspective as to just how big these vertical farms are. Bowery Farming, who declares themselves to be the largest vertical farming company in the U.S., recently announced its expansion into Arlington, Texas, just outside Dallas, to erect their newest smart indoor farm that will serve 16 million people in a 200-mile radius. Can you imagine Bill Gates having control of the food supply to 16 million people in a 200-mile radius? This is what smart cities are going to look like in the future. They're not going to be any more borders. The United States is going to be irrelevant. All countries will be irrelevant. You're going to be identified by the city you live in. What makes this facility so smart anyway? Well, let's look at their promotional video.
Bowery Farming is a vertical farming company. It's in the agri-tech space.
We grow crops 365 days a year. We're bringing a lot of automation using both traditional like manufacturing practices and, cutting edge technology in order to grow the best quality produce all year round.
I got a call from a recruiter about a farm. My initial thought was, why would I want to be a farmer? When I came in, I was pleasantly surprised because I was thinking of traditional farm. Outside, in the elements, in the environment, it was a wow effect for me. I got the position as a modern...
Who wants to be outside in the elements, putting up with all the elements and, living in the air? Who wants to do that?
Farm supervisor. Then the position opened up as an industrial engineer on the farm design team. So I was super excited. But working here at Bowery, you work cross-functionally. You work across different departments. You get to use skills that you didn't even know you had. It helps you to bring out a different side of yourself.
Innovation is at the core of Bowery Farming. In fact, it's built into our company values.
So if you'll notice, the people they use in these promotions, these presentations, all very young and happy and vibrant, and it's all about the positive, how exciting this all is. You don't ever see who's actually in control, who's actually in charge of it, who's funding it, and what they intend to do with it. It's all very happy and,
My favorite values are break barriers together and think wildly different. And that sets the foundation for me and my team to be able to speak with folks on other teams, our stakeholders, to collaborate to build products that help the company scale and grow. So an example of that would be, for a given project, you can find a hardware engineer working together with a software engineer, working together with someone from our farm designs teams to build a product that helps our crops grow better.
If we're partnering with a scientist in terms of a crop level, we may need to ensure that our systems are in place to introduce new data points that they may need to track. We also want to make sure that we're working with our data team so that any of those...
after a while, it just gets to be just like, okay, all right, you're excited about it. And I don't want to sit here and act like a cynic. I'm not a cynic. We have reason to be suspicious of all of this because of the few people who are controlling it. If all of the food supply is controlled by 10 companies, and then the same 3 or 4 top shareholders keep showing up in all of these companies, and it's all back to Gates, back to the usual suspects, Soros, back to these people that have demonstrated clearly that they want to control every element of the earth. They want to control you, have access to your cells, and in fact control the whole planet. Well, then we have reason to be worried about it. According to Bowery, their farm is powered with 100% renewable energy, integrating software, hardware, sensors, computer vision systems, machine learning models, and robotics, all to orchestrate and automate their operations. Despite this full automated operation, they state it will provide jobs for 100 people. Think about that. You can feed people in a 200-mile radius, 16 million people, 100 people. Provides jobs for 100 people when they open their doors in 2023. That's nothing. tells you a lot about what we're looking at. Of course, their overall goal is to produce traceable, pesticide-free food to every major city in the U.S. and throughout the world. Traceable food. I wonder when the tracing stops. Does it stop after you eat it? February 2022, Bowery acquired Traptic, a company that builds giant farming robots. So they're based in New York City, of course, has facilities in New Jersey, Maryland, Pennsylvania, coming soon to Texas, coming soon to Locust Grove, Georgia, to serve the Atlanta metropolitan area. Bowery has been serving e-commerce platforms, plus over 800 grocery stores, including, and another list of grocery stores and suppliers that you would recognize, all of them. It's too long to read. There's another one here called InFarm, founded in 2013 by Erez Galonska, Guy Galonska, and Osnat Mikaeli. InFarm is a private company based in Berlin, Germany. That's what we are. They use hydroponic farming in grocery stores so that the produce grows on site. It grows right there in the grocery store. It all sounds like a great idea, doesn't it? Some of this stuff really sounds like it would be helpful. Let's use our technology. Let's let it advance. The problem is, once again, the same evil people. They've raised over $600 million in funds from 23 investors. Who are those investors? The same ones mentioned before. It's the same investors over and over and over. The same top stockholders over and over. Another company, Iron Ox, founded in 2015 by Brandon Alexander and John Benny. Iron Ox is a private company headquartered in San Carlos, California. Bill Gates' Breakthrough Energy Ventures invested $50 million in Iron Ox. Let's listen.
I think it's a really exciting way we can move forward in agriculture right now.
Silicon Valley company Iron Ox believes robots may be the answer to growing produce more sustainably, as widespread drought continues to threaten.
Of course, there's nothing wrong with using robots to grow food, right? But keep listening.
Threaten agriculture across the world. And big investors are noticing. Bill Gates' Breakthrough Energy Ventures is betting on them, leading the latest $50 million funding round. At the company's 10,000 square foot greenhouse in Gilroy, California, robots are integrated with a hydroponic system the company is using to grow produce. A robot named Grover moves pallets of produce, mostly Genovese basil, around the facility. It's a delicate task. Each pallet, known as a module, carries 80 gallons of water with roughly 70 seedlings, around 1,200 pounds of material.
It's fascinating. It's really interesting. No doubt, this is amazing technology. It could be used for such good, and perhaps it will be in some degree. But they've raised over $103 million in funds from 20 investors, with Gates' company accounting for 50% of the funding. I'm not a cynic, but that's not good for us. Plenty Unlimited, founded in 2014 by Jack Oslin, Matt Bernard, Nate Mazinson, and Nate Story. Plenty is a private company headquartered in San Francisco. They use hydroponics to grow their leafy greens. At Plenty, they say, let's see, do we have a video from Plenty? Guess we do, don't we?
This is the first farm on Mars. Okay, technically it's not on Mars. It's
maybe nothing's there.
It's Wyoming. So, close enough. Anyway, it could be on Mars. Because this is one of the world's most advanced indoor farms. And it could be the future of farming right here on Earth. With vertical farming, you can start with a building roughly the size of a Costco, grow your crops up and down instead of around you on the floor, ditch the pesticides, recycle the water, and you can grow pretty much anywhere, anytime.
In January of 2022, Walmart announced its long-term partnership with Plenty with a $400 million investment, allowing for Walmart to source Plenty's produce for their California stores. And on and on. Plenty's goal is to erect 500 vertical farms in highly populated urban areas around the world. They've raised almost $1 billion in funds from 13 investors, and it's the same investors. Once again, you can see it here. Who's at the top? One of the top investors here would be Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos, who has played his role in surveillance. Upward Farms, founded in 2013 by Ben Silverman, Jason Green, Matt LaRosa. Upward Farms is a private company headquartered in Brooklyn, New York. They currently only have 5 investors. They recently announced their plans to build the world's largest indoor vertical farm in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, capping out 250,000 square feet in 2023. It's all happening, my friends. They've raised over $140 million in funds from 5 investors. Yes, it is the same people once again. So in addition to these vertical farms that are going up everywhere, giant greenhouses are being erected as well, much like App Harvest in Kentucky. Rhode Island Grows, Rhode Island Grows is the name of the company, is in the process of building one. Exeter and some Rhode Islanders aren't too happy about it. The company projects they can yield up to 650,000 pounds of tomatoes per acre, with a goal to expand to 350 acres, just knocking out any farmer in the region for sure. Eventually, 5 years to eventually take over 1,000 acres. Their plan is to serve 6 states between Boston and New York. Over in Virginia Beach, former Governor Ralph Northern announced in April 2021 that Sunny Farms will invest $60 million into a 120,000 square foot hydroponic greenhouse. 2021, Shenandoah Growers Incorporated rebranded themselves as Solely Organic and plan to expand from 7 farms to 15 farms, utilizing their proprietary soil-based controlled environment system for indoor agriculture. Gotham Greens is producing produce in their climate-controlled year-round rooftop greenhouses in Baltimore, Brooklyn, Chicago, Davis, California, Denver, Providence, and Queens. By adding the second greenhouse to Chicago, they've doubled their heads of lettuce production to 11 million heads per year. The Whole Foods building in Brooklyn is where they built their first one back in 2013 as the first giant greenhouse supermarket combo. Who controls the food controls the people. That's our message today. The squeeze has been taking place for decades. From the government stealing land to putting unrealistic restrictions and regulations on ranchers and farmers, controlling our free water, even controlling the rainwater, selling out over 35 million acres of U.S. agricultural farmland to foreign investors, globalists like Bill Gates buying up hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland, burning down food processing plants while manufacturing supply chain issues, and preventing transportation of critical farming supplies such as fertilizer, all while building indoor vertical farming backed by globalists as they roll out new energy and infrastructure regulations. They're going to control all of it, from the energy it requires to run it to the seeds that they grow, while at the same time preventing you from growing your own food and only letting you have access to their food if you have your digital ID. Most people believe China has bought up much of the U.S. farmland, and they actually hold a small percentage as compared to Canada, who holds the largest share of U.S. farmland. Then the Netherlands, Italy, Germany, and the United Kingdom. China falls last, and a big chunk of it is owned by the WH Group. Smithfield Foods in Missouri, who Corey Diggs previously reported on. The National Young Farmers Coalition estimates that 2/3 of farmland will change hands over the next decade due to farmers retiring or being asked or forced to retire. With all of the regulations, inflation, and supply issues, all of which has been manufactured, there is a heavy burden on U.S. farmers, and the globalists have carefully calculated their moves to bring in the vertical indoor farms and lab-grown meat in typical savior style. Forbes estimates over $20 trillion in investments are following ESG and socially responsible investment style factors, while BlackRock CEO Larry Fink insists that it's time to force people's behavior to change, to expand ESG investments even further. Despite the LED lighting, robotics, computer data analysis, and ventilation systems required to power vertical growing facilities of this magnitude, since water is being saved unless Bill Gates' landmass is being used, investments are flowing into these alleged sustainable and environmentally friendly facilities, as well as massive greenhouses. While over 190 member countries of the World Health Organization move as briskly as they can to turn over power to the World Health Organization in a global pandemic treaty to control the healthcare system and demand global jabs and digital certificates, they've already rolled out the Rockefellers' 10-year global genomic surveillance strategy. It's all about genetics with these folks. Did you catch that? The Rockefeller Global Genomic Surveillance. I got to get that link for you here, so you can have that. Let's get that link for you, folks, to find my way back to the article now. Here we go. Yeah, so we're on, wow, it's down to page 29. I know this has been a deep dive, my friends, but we appreciate you hanging in there with us. This goes down to the bottom. You want to see this. I know you want to read about this. The Rockefeller 10-year global genomic surveillance strategy. It's down here. There it is. Get you this link right here so you can check it out for yourself. World Health Organization Global Genomic Surveillance Strategy. If I can get that to fit on the screen, there we go. For pathogens with pandemic and epidemic potential. Rockefeller funded. It's not just because the name Rockefeller, folks. There's a reason why that is important. If you're new to the game, you might not understand why the name Rockefeller is significant there. If you'll just search for James Corbett, Corbett Report online, he's done this research years ago about Rockefeller medicine men. We've shown you here the Rockefeller Operation Lockstep in 2015, where everything that happened in 2020 was obviously planned. National Geographic believes that gene editing is the next food revolution, explaining that hundreds of research and development labs are testing CRISPR's potential to produce faster growing food with all sorts of benefits. According to their 2018 article, they state that U.S. federal regulators are not requiring strict regulations and years of testing like they did with GMOs because the plants won't contain foreign DNA. However, the European Union's High Court ruled to regulate gene-edited plants the same as GMOs. Interesting how some places they do and some places they don't. Must have something to do with power, money, and the person with authority in the region. Genetics, synthetics, and digital citizenry is marching its way forward, and people are going to need to take a stand where they can. Be aware of what they're buying. Be aware of what you're ingesting. Be aware of what you're signing up for. You need to support and help farmers and ranchers as much as possible right now. Building your own small-scale vertical indoor farm or greenhouse is a smart idea. Families and communities growing food, building a homestead, and collaborating is a great step in the right direction. A place called Farm Match, right here, I'll show you this link too. A place called Farm Match connects people with local farmers. We've got one of these in our area. I'll show you this, Farm Match. So you can find regular guys, regular farmers that aren't funded by Bill Gates, that just make money off the food they sell to you. Here you go. Here's a link in the chat for that, Farm Match. Buy top-rated food from small farms and buying clubs. This is how we take back our food.
Farmmatch.com. If you're someone who understands the vital role that food plays in your health, then farmmatch.com is definitely the website for you. On farmmatch.com, you can get super quality food from small scale farms in your area. And if there's not a farm in your area, we'll even find a farm that will ship to you if you happen to be in one of those food deserts. All you have to do to order food is enter your zip code, find the farm you want to buy from, and then select whether you want home delivery or you can pick up from a location in your local area.
All right, there are many other examples of this. You can look, you can search for these in your area. Many different organizations like this, they're making it available so that you can get connected with local farmers, right? Do something. Right here, the Solari Food Series, I'll share this link with you as well, will help you figure out, understand how to do more for yourself, to protect yourself and have good food and not be, at least for now and for the foreseeable future, stuck having to eat what Bill Gates wants you to eat. Okay? There, that link, I put that link in the chat there. That's to the Solari Food Series. It has all of relevant links. Winning the War on Meat. How one consumer can make a difference. Homesteading. All right, more and more stuff. So this is how we do it. We communicate with one another. We share the information as we get it. It's called crowdsourcing. Good information. And Solari Report does a good job at this. So there's no way to sugarcoat There's no way to sugarcoat it or sugarcoat it. This system they're implementing, whereas vertical farming is brilliant in many ways and could be beneficial on a smaller scale in communities, the fact that this is part of the global agenda to remove farms and control all produce, and by extension all food by the globalists themselves, makes it very concerning that we see the same names over and over and over. Imagine in the not too distant future going for a drive in the countryside in your mandated electric vehicle and observing dried up farmland replaced by giant wind turbines. It's a very dystopian image that no one wants to experience. So we have to work together to find a way forward and continue to say no to the digital ID they are creating to control our access and our spending, while building self-sufficiency and security together. All right. If you have any helpful resources or ideas of your own, you can go, the link to this, to the Solari report here, to this article is in the description of this video. You can go to the bottom of this article and you can leave your comments below there. You can leave your comments below this video as well if you have any ideas or any solutions of your own. So that has been a deep dive into this who controls the food story. So appreciate you hanging in there with us, folks. Let me remind you that please drop by armoroftruth.net. There's a donate tab there if you want to help us. Thanks to those of you who've donated during the show today. Brian, I appreciate you donating over on the website. Pollyanna here in the Super Chat, YouTube Super Chat. So all of this comes back to, we also have a Cash App now. $aotmin. AOTMIN. Please subscribe to our newsletter. You can go to the website. You'll get a pop-up that'll help you there. It's also linked in the description of this video, and I'm sure Summer's been sharing that here during our show. But of course, Barack Obama has mentioned this before. He said, "We will restore science to its rightful place," which means under my administration, Americans will have fewer choices. Under my administration and the ones that come after me, Americans will have fewer choices about how they live, fewer choices as voters, because rightfully those choices should be made by officials who rule by authority of science. Science is quickly becoming a deity to these globalists. This argument, do what we say because we're certified to know better, is just a slight variant of the idea, do what we say because we are us, which reminds you of the noble lie. You have to tell the people what to believe in. The administrative state depends on the designation and sponsorship of an army of government experts that influence, persuade the populace and intimidate, suppress, and censor opposing viewpoints and attack and suppress opposing parties. The intimidation is totalitarian in nature, and the expert army serves as the paternalistic and tyrannical oligarch state. President Eisenhower, in his farewell speech in January of 1961, said, "The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is grave to be regarded. Yet, in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite." That's what we mean when we keep pointing to Bill Gates and Bezos and Zuckerberg and all of these other names that I haven't mentioned. While we pray to God, who created and sustains us, these ruling elites pray to themselves. They say they're the saviors of the planet. They say they're the improvers of humanity. They lift high the beacon of secular enlightenment, humanism, and the evolution of the human condition to a socialist, collectivist utopia. And that is why they can live with their noble lies. They really believe in them. Of course, as we've seen what's going on in our culture today, the tyranny of all tyrannies, the one that is sincerely exercised for the good of its victims, is certainly the most oppressive. Joseph Schumpeter said the first casualty of idealism is the truth. The point is that these political tyrannies and totalitarian states are built on lies. Never forget this. Their whole system is built on lies. And the populace is tamed by lies when we believe them. And we're intimidated by lies when we believe them. Especially if our neighbors are all repeating the lies and believing them. George Orwell wrote in 1984, "It's important to get the populace to believe the lie, to assert the lie." Orwell is the one who invented the term newspeak, that included terms that describe the nature of totalitarian society: good think, crime think, double think, thought crime, thought poll, wrong think, which is what we're participating in here today if you'll ask one of these other people. All part of the effort to control the populace, a strategy to impose the big lie as part of the project to intimidate and control you. Dissent and disagreement are fundamentally democratic, and statists are dedicated to the suppression of dissent and censorship of opposition. I would suspect that the totalitarians, the global commanders, the communitarian leaders, the local governments who've been bought by the United Nations and the Gates and the Bezos, and even this very platform from which I'm speaking to you right now, I'll bet you they're all a little bit nervous. They're nervous today. They're nervous with the words I'm speaking. And they're nervous that you're interested in what I'm saying. They're nervous about the Solari report. They're nervous about Corey Diggs. They're nervous about John Rappaport. Mostly they're nervous about you, the Christians who stand on a certain truth, who understand certainty and can show it to be so. We are men and women who hold to our right to openly voice an opinion without fearing what the technocrats might do to us or say about us. We know that liberty exists only when we are willing to dissent to exercise our free will, and when we're willing to accept the consequences of being God's free representatives on the earth. Most all of you and I know that we must exercise our right to act independently according to our own conscience, which is bound by God's transcendent and written word law. That's where the truth is. This live audience, and you guys watching this video on replay, is full of people who are dangerous to and detested by the ruling class elites. They are scared of you because you know what they're up to. H.L. Mencken said the whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by menacing the people with endless series of hobgoblins, all of them imaginary, future catastrophes that may happen, man-made climate change, all of this. Endless hobgoblins, all of them imaginary. The precautionary principle and the goal of practical politics energize and enable this noble lie and this paternalistic tyranny. Fear and anxiety expressed in the political mindset of zero tolerance and the precautionary principle is also the key to the enablement of the state and its comrades and bureaucrats who derive their power from their ability to designate experts in the service of the state who pose as rescuers of the populace from these hobgoblins and uncertainties that make the populace so eager and scared and in fear that they ask to please lead me to safety. Their rejection of the practice of calculating probabilities is motivated by a belief that the dangers we face are so overwhelmingly catastrophic. Things like the millennium bug, international terrorism, swine flu, climate change, that we cannot wait until we have all the information before we calculate the destructive effects. No, we have to lock it down before we know. Shut it down is the default response. One of the many regrettable consequences of this outlook is that policies designed to deal with threats are increasingly based on feelings and intuition rather than evidence or facts. Today, the problems associated with risk and uncertainty are constantly being amplified, and courtesy of our own imaginations, are turned into existential threats. Consequently, it is rare for unexpected natural events to be treated as just that, unexpected and natural. They're always used as a proof that the climate's changing. Rather, they're swiftly dramatized and transformed into a threat to human survival. The reasonable person would ask the question, how does the oligarchy get scientists to support the noble lie? Whether it's environmental, social, or other forms of scientific inquiry, how do you get scientists to go along with this and say it's consensus? Well, it's kind of easy when you think about it. It's easy to see how a scientist offered a good job and a nice lifestyle, high income, for producing results that please the funding source. It's easy to see how that scientist could suddenly misplace his morals. Is there a path in America to rational science and policy making? Is it possible to prevent the noble lie from dominating policy making? We're about to find out, because we're at the crossroads now. And as we've seen recently, here we go. Elon Musk is the savior of free speech, or so they say. Well, look at this, folks. To thank the lovely Summer for putting this together. Elon Musk is listed as a member, attendee of the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders Program. And he is just as tickled as he can be to support whatever Klaus Schwab supports. Carbon tax. Klaus Schwab says why carbon tax is crucial to curbing climate change and gives an article. And what does Elon Musk say? Well, it's high time we had a carbon tax. Klaus Schwab says 4 reasons cities, in his article says 4 reasons cities should embrace universal basic income. Elon Musk says, as a reminder, I'm in favor of UBI. Klaus Schwab says 3 tactics to overcome COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy. Elon Musk here says, to be clear, I do support vaccines in general and COVID vaccines specifically. The science is unequivocal. He's going to save you. He's going to save you on Twitter, is he? World Economic Forum. Klaus Schwab says, would you let your employer implant a microchip in your hand? These workers have. Elon Musk says, creating a neural lace is the thing that really matters for humanity to achieve symbiosis with machines. Who in the world wants that other than someone who's lost the plot? So Elon Musk supports carbon tax, UBI, mRNA, myocarditis. I can't say that on this platform. He supports transhumanism and supports one world government. What else do you need to know about Elon Musk, the champion of free speech? Meanwhile, while Elon Musk is supposedly saving free speech, the Department of Homeland Security sets up a disinformation governance board to fight misinformation everywhere, especially on Twitter, on the internet. This article is linked in the description for you as well. Department of Homeland Security Chief Alejandro Mayorkas revealed the new initiative to lawmakers during a congressional hearing on April 27th, just last week, when asked by Congressman Jim Langevin, Democrat of Rhode Island, about what the department was doing to ensure election security and prevent misinformation from being used in the electoral process ahead of the 2022 midterms. Right. In other words, ensuring that their message is the one that gets out. The announcement was, we've just established a disinformation governance board in the Department of Homeland Security to more effectively combat this threat, not only to election security, but to our homeland security. That means everywhere, including Twitter. Mayorkas responded, noting that the new board will also focus on stopping the spread of misinformation in minority communities. Christian, did you know you're in a minority community? Bible-believing Christian who believes there's one way to the Father, follower of Jesus, you're a minority. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said Monday that a board on disinformation recently convened by the DHS will operate in a non-partisan, apolitical manner, and we trust the Biden administration, don't we? She said this mandate is not to adjudicate what is true or false online or otherwise. It will operate in a nonpartisan, apolitical manner. It's basically meant to coordinate a lot of the ongoing work that is happening. And the focus is on disinformation and threats to the homeland. I guess like us here, we're threats to the homeland, because certainly shadow ban. Psaki said the board would address disinformation related to threats such as violent extremism. Of course, Christian, you're an extremist. Human trafficking and malign foreign influence. She also noted many people could fall, anybody could fall under the category of a violent extremist. She also noted, as she did last week, that the work of the board started under former President Trump's administration in 2020. Of course, it's all the same movement. And as you heard in the article we just shared with you, the long-form article, the pandemic treaty being set up to give full control to the World Health Organization. We'll give Tedros 40 seconds here.
There will always be new pathogens with pandemic potential.
Always.
It's not a matter of if, but when.
How convenient. New treaty to shield against future health crises. Of course, it's about health. So keeping you safe.
I'm pleased that more leaders are now joining the call for a pandemic treaty, which would be a generational commitment to keeping the world safe.
In the name of keeping everyone safe, no doubt. More of the same. We don't need to listen anymore of Tedros. We know what he's going to say. The cabal is planning to monopolize health systems worldwide. Through the creation of this pandemic treaty, the World Health Organization may also be planning to seize power over health systems more broadly. And food. We know that now too. In the name of keeping everyone safe from infection, the globalist cabal has justified unprecedented attacks on democracy, civil liberties, personal freedoms. If the treaty goes through, the World Health Organization would have power to call for mandatory jabs and health passports, and its decision would supersede all national and state laws. That's world government. And considering the World Health Organization changed its definition of pandemic to a worldwide epidemic of a disease to make it very broad, removing the requirement of high morbidity, just about anything could be made to fit the criterion, including obesity. Smart health card systems used by more than a dozen countries, 25 U.S. states and Puerto Rico and Washington, and the Australian Parliament is pushing the Trusted Digital Identity Bill. U.S. Congress is pushing the Improving Digital Identity Act, and the World Health Organization has signed a deal with Deutsche Telekom subsidiary to build the first global digital vaccine passport. All of these have one thing in common: the end goal, which is to expand them into souped-up global social credit system. That's where we are. In Romans 1, verse 16, we read about salvation. The Bible from Genesis chapter 3 to Revelation 22 is about salvation. But the question is this: from what are we being saved? Are we being saved from Satan? Are we being saved from evil men? Are we being saved from global disasters? Are we being saved from sin? No. First and foremost, we're being saved from the wrath of God that we righteously deserve. That is what salvation means. You've been made righteous by the blood of Christ before a holy God. You did nothing to earn it. But He saved you anyway because you are the apple of His eye, and God loves His people. One theologian said it this way: unless there is something to be saved from, there's no point in talking about salvation. Verse 18 of Romans 1 says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness." Here, the word ungodliness refers to man's offenses against God, while unrighteousness refers to the sins of man against man. Many, if not most, of the sins man commits against man happen as a result of good intentions, goodwill. I don't doubt that there are many people who are working for this globalist movement and pushing for more control because they think it's a good idea. They think it's the right thing to do. They think they're saving the earth and making people safe. However, the leaders of the movement have shown their cards. We know who they are. We can show that their aims are unquestionably authoritarian and in conflict with the law of God. As we stated earlier, the biblical concept is lex rex. The law is king. The global movement we see today has reversed that to rex lex. The king is the law, and they serve their king. Their king, either by choice or by default, is Satan, the father of lies, the father of contradiction, and the desires of their father they want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning, does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, because he is a liar and the father of it. John 8:44. A person or a nation will always become like the God they serve. And this is why it's so important that we be vigilant to compare our own conception of God against the reality of who God is as revealed in His Word. Christians are also capable of falling into worship of a self-made God or an idol. This global governance movement with its anti-human policies suppresses the truth of God. Every truth revealed to man by God has been fought against, disregarded, and deliberately obscured. It's not that these men and women don't know God. It's not that they don't think He exists. They know He exists. They know who He is. And yet they refuse to glorify Him as God. That's what the Scriptures tell us. Therefore, mankind is without excuse. Instead of glorifying God, we transformed our idea of Him into forms and images more comfortable to our corrupt and darkened hearts. That's what men do. And God allows us to experience the self-destructive result of sin. And we're witnessing on a global scale the exact results mentioned in Romans chapter 1. We're seeing what God's wrath actually looks like when He gives a nation or nations over to the will of mankind, to follow their own hearts, to follow their own designs. Their own hearts, which are desperately sick without Christ. In verse 24 of Romans 1, we read, God gave them up to vile passions, or gave them over in the lusts of their hearts to impurity. The Apostle Paul wrote this letter from the city of Corinth, where every sort of sexual immorality and ritualistic prostitution was practiced freely. He is speaking about the combination of sexual immorality and idolatrous worship. Does that look familiar? This applies to our nation and our world right now. Recently, in an article viewing the COVID-19 pandemic through the lens of the Christian worldview, pastor, author, lecturer, theologian Joe Boot wrote, times of duress tend to bring out our truest colors and can betray our most deeply held beliefs. When we're up against it and stretched to the end of our tether, what we really believe to be true comes to the surface. No longer can we so easily hide behind deceptive masks. If we sincerely believe that there is a personal God who cares for our deepest needs and even knows the number of hairs on our heads, working all things providentially for our good, Romans 8:28, we will respond to crises on our knees, straining forward to hear His voice and follow His lead. If, on the other hand, we think deep down that that's a bunch of nonsense, then when disaster strikes, we won't turn to God, but rather we will set our beliefs on any number of things, like maybe Bill Gates, including whatever notion the media decides to whip up. Ask G.K. Chesterton. He once said, when men choose not to believe in God, they do not thereafter believe in nothing. Then they become capable of believing anything. So as we've pointed out here today, the most powerful governments of the world are seeking global solutions to problems that mostly they have created. The greatest peril facing the human race is the wrath of God. God's wrath is revealed from heaven against the human race, and the human race deserves the wrath of God. Human intellect often objects to this notion of the wrath of God because we think it means the same thing as human anger, which is motivated by self-centered personal reasons or desires for revenge. But the wrath of God is completely righteous in character, never unjust. One theologian said this, wrath is the only holy revulsion of God's being against that which is the contradiction of His holiness. The rejection of God in general makes a mind futile in its thoughts and makes a foolish heart darkened. And thus they become fools. This also applies to nations. The fact is, once a man rejects the truth of God and Jesus, he will fall for anything foolish and trust the most unreasonable ideas. Part of His judgment against us is allowing us to suffer the damage of our sinful course and what it leads to. But this is where we come in. If you want to be an effective witness and actually participate in changing the world, call people to repentance. If you want to be a prophet, call people to repentance. That's what the prophets did. Share the gospel. Get up and get out of your comfort zone and accept Jesus' command to make disciples of all the nations. The greatest commission of all time. Tim Cantrell, who is a pastor in South Africa, dealing with this up close and personal already. He said, "Trust us," said the government. They even said it with tears. "We truly have your best interest at heart. All we want to do is to help and keep you safe. Nothing more. We promise." Friends, do you realize by legalizing abortion, world governments kill more unborn babies in 1 year than all the lives of the pandemic would kill in 100 years at the current rate? And always in the name of women's health or reproductive health. At the time this was written, already by mid-January of 2021, over 2 million babies have been murdered by these wonderful, loving governments that are so concerned about human safety and public health. Not to mention countries like here in South Africa, where violent crime is still rampant and out of control. Yet suddenly our authorities have an incredible zeal about protecting you and me. William Pitt, famed Prime Minister of the UK, close friend of Wilberforce, Christian who was important force. Wilberforce was an important force in ending slavery. Once wrote, "Necessity," in other words, public health or common good, "is the plea of every infringement on human freedom. It is the argument of tyrants. It is the creed of slaves. Get people afraid so they'll do whatever you want. A fearful society becomes very compliant. Panicking people will believe anything." During the gruesome, bloody days of the French Revolution, when 40,000 innocent citizens lost their heads, simply because a neighbor snitched on them, who was it that operated the guillotine day and night? Well, it was none other than the Committee for Public Safety. Friends, thank you for joining us and being with us here this week. We look forward to seeing you again soon. We'll be off next week. No problems. It's just that time. It's time to go rest the voice. What was this? 3 hours and a half. That's a lot. So we've given you a lot to think about while we're away from the studio. Please watch it. Share it. Download it. Cut it up and do whatever you want with it. But make sure other people see it. If you would, please. God bless you, my friends. We'll see you again here next time.
The hammer comes down and beats you over the head for the rest of your life with a big national security stick. And so that people learn to duck their head and not speak up. Because bad idea now.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Citizens are advised to take the following steps.
Find us, armoroftruth.net.
age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism.
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel.
This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test.